Okay. Thank you. So let's see, for those people in the room, I think everybody knows where the restrooms are. They're out the back door here in the hall. Please help yourself to snacks. You should have received ahead of time an agenda, a meeting summary for meeting number 6, a memo from Ben that describes the methodology for reasonably stable water levels, a revised version of Division 8, and then also the presentation. So that is the entirety of our materials for today. For the people in the room, if you need hard copies, there's hard copies at the back of the room. Our agenda today really, I think our purpose for today is, since we last met, the Water Resources Commission has had 2 informational sessions on these draft proposed rules. The commission received a lot of comments. We also received comments after our last meeting. So we wanted to talk about what we heard both at the commission meeting and from the other comments that we received. Some of the things that we heard that I think we're intending to discuss and share information with you about during this meeting is that we are relying on science from the 50 years ago from the Yuma Basin. If we want to make sure everybody understands that that is not the case. I think the other thing that was heard is that people want science-based rules. So we're here to talk about the science and better understand what is it that isn't resonating for those folks who are commenting that they're not science-based. We also heard that a regional approach is better than a statewide approach. We've got some information here to talk about the analysis that we've done to indicate that what we have proposed is appropriate at statewide level. And again, there will be an opportunity to develop regional approaches moving forward. And then the final comment that we really want to talk about is the comment that we should wait until the studies called for under House Bill 2018 should be complete before moving forward. So that's an overview of sort of the main things that we want to get at with our agenda today. We do intend and anticipate that there will be lots of opportunity for comment and discussion. And before we actually jump into the agenda, let's do introductions, since I did not start there at the outset. So I'm going to start with the folks online, and I'm going to call on people in the order in which I see them, starting with the RAC members. So Casey, please.
Hi, Casey McClellan with Seven Hills Winery and Oregon Wine Growers.
Thank you. Bill?
Hi, this is Bill Brown, Northwest Groundwater Services, the hydrogeologist.
Thank you. Bill?
Hi, I'm having a little trouble with my speakers and microphones, but if you can hear me, I'm Bill Jager. I'm in the Department of Applied Economics at Oregon State University.
Thank you, Bill. We could hear you well. Cheyenne?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Cheyenne Holiday. I am the advocacy manager at Verde, based in Portland, Oregon.
And then Chris Marks, are you here for Kelly today?
This is Kelly Warren, Water Code Administrator for the Federated Tribes Umatilla Indian Reservation, and Chris is in another meeting.
Thank you, Kelly. Dave Wildman.
Yes, this is Dave Wildman with Anderson Perry and Associates, just representing several Eastern Oregon communities.
Thank you. Karen.
You would think after 3 years I would get that mute thing figured out. Karen Lewatsky, Oregon Environmental Council, Water Program Director and Rural Partnerships Lead.
Thank you. Kate, I believe you're here for Jen today.
Good morning, Kate Fitzpatrick with the Deschutes River Conservancy here for Jen Hubert. Yes.
Thank you. Lauren,
Hi, Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau.
thank you. Taking a minute here. Robin,
Good morning, Robin Cook. I'm a hydrogeologist with GSI Water Solutions out of Portland.
thank you. Zach,
Good morning. Good to see you all again. Zach Freed, Nature Conservancy.
okay, are there any Rules Advisory Committee members online that I missed? Okay,
Mike Bittner here from the city of Bend, Utilities Director here, representing COCO along with Adam Sussman.
thank you, Mike. We're gonna go to introductions in the room and we will start with Adam.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Adam Sussman with GSI here on behalf of Central Oregon Cities Organization.
Thank you. Tammy?
Tammy Wood, I'm a retired USGS hydrologist and I'm here representing the Oregon Lake Association.
I don't need to call on you folks, just continue.
Kate Patel, Oregon Water Resources Congress, representing irrigation districts and similar water supply.
Jeff Stone, Executive Director of the Oregon Association of Fisheries.
Greg Capillas with Pacific Hydrogeology, hydrogeologist and water rights examiner, representing Oregon Groundwater Association on behalf of all of the groundwater users that we serve.
Thank you. Lisa?
Lisa Brown with Water Watch of Oregon.
Thank you. How is the volume for the individuals who have joined us virtually? Can you hear people in the room well?
It's good.
Just fine.
Fabulous. Oh, Misty, please introduce yourself.
I was having trouble unmuting.
Okay, I will note that Misty Buckley, who is a homeowner in the Klamath Basin and a Rules Advisory Committee member, has also joined us. Are there any Rules Advisory Committee members who have not yet introduced themselves? Okay, here in the room, on behalf of the department, we'll start with Ivan.
Ivan Gall with Water Resources Department.
Travis Brown, hydrogeologist in the groundwater section.
Justin Iverson, I manage the groundwater section.
Ben Scandella, groundwater data chief.
Laura Brett, water policy analyst and rules coordinator.
Thank you. So with that, let's jump in and we'll start with review of the meeting summary from the last Rules Advisory Committee meeting. Put it in the chat. Oh, yeah. Actually, before we jump in, because I'm noticing that we have quite a few individuals who are not Rules Advisory Committee members who have joined us. We're happy you're here. I want to note that if you are a member of the public and you are intending to present public comment, we will do that at 11:30. And I would request that you please hold your comment until then. I will also check in with folks about when we need to break. So just that'll be coming as well. So with that, the draft summary for the RAC number 6, please.
Okay, so if anybody had any questions, comments, or corrections about the meeting summary from the last RAC meeting, happy to take those now.
I think you guys do a good job. So
thank you, Jeff.
I actually read it.
Any questions or comments from individuals online on the meeting summary? Okay, so we will remove the draft watermark and post that to the website for this project. And we will move on to Laura, please.
Okay, so just if you just go to the next slide, just wanted to give you a little bit of update on what's been going on, I guess, since our September RAC meeting. So, you know, there's been a little bit of change and additional outreach efforts. We've had a couple of commission meetings, briefings to the Groundwater Advisory Committee, presentations to the Oregon Water Law Conference. We've shared, our presentation with the cultural resources cluster. We, checked in, during, legislative days with the House Committee on Ag and so forth. Also checking in with local governments, including representatives of COCO, our sister agencies, including LC, and these efforts are ongoing. We've got some upcoming events I made a note of as well. So we're presenting to the Association of County Planning Directors in January. I believe the Carney folks have invited us to present at their annual summit. There's also a conference, annual conference of the Oregon Association of Water Utilities in March that we've been asked to present at as well, and we remain, open and welcome invitations to share what we're doing here. So I just wanted to let you all know that we've been busy and talking to folks. Yeah.
It seems apparent anyway that, things have happened, since our last meeting that's prompted us to, convene back here again. I know you touched on it already, but I'm kind of curious about if there's any particular issues of concern that have been raised that maybe we can just kind of discuss a little bit here, so we understand really, kind of why we're here.
Do you want me to go back through? You want me to answer? Sure. Okay, so we really heard, I think, comments at the Water Resources Commission meeting and the comments that were submitted to the commission meeting and to us around the issues that I laid out up front, which are concerns that we're not using current science, concerns that a regional approach would be more appropriate, concerns that we should wait for House Bill 2018 studies to be done before moving forward. And really the concerns about whether or not these are science-based. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, what we're trying to engage with you all on with the agenda that we have put together for today.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I heard all that, and I guess I was looking for something maybe a little more specific. If there were specific comments raised by people, who testified that, that raised specific concerns, particular concerns among the commission, for example.
Not that I'm aware of, other than, I think there are comments around the impacts on municipalities.
Okay.
And there was a specific comment that was submitted by the Central Oregon Cities Organization that we're happy to talk about as well.
Yeah.
And it did come up at the commission meeting in November as well. Mike.
Yeah, hi, Annette. Mike Bittner, City of Bend. Just wanted to ask another question, Annette, if you could elaborate on really the definition around science-based. I think that we all know there's a lot of good science being used in this rulemaking and has been to date. It's really about the application of that science and where, and how it's, what is appropriate, I think. But could you talk a little bit about, is there a definition we're all going by as far as what is and is not science-based?
I think that's one of the things that we want to talk about with the RAC, with the Rules Advisory Committee.
Thank you.
So I'll have additional comment as we go forward, and I think several of you know I've made comments at the last commission meeting expressing concerns from the agricultural perspective as well as the broader state level, and a number of us also provided written comments in the summer. And I do appreciate that we are having this meeting and the meeting in January, and hopefully that will result in better outcomes for all of us. To this slide that's up here, and in the commission materials, it was discussed and stated that you guys would be doing more outreach and engagement. And I'm heartened to see that there's been a number of folks that have heard some presentations, but that's what most of these seem to be, is presentations. And so I was curious, I guess, the twofold question, have you guys done any proactive outreach to groups, particularly those that aren't directly represented on this RAC or just generally speaking. And if you haven't, do you plan on doing any proactive outreach or more one-on-one engagement with some of these groups that allow for an actual conversation as opposed to just a presentation at an event in front of a microphone where there's 100+ people? Doesn't always get where you get the questions that you might get if it was in a smaller group.
I appreciate the question, April, and I think our intention is to do both. We have done some proactive outreach to organizations who have representatives on the Rules Advisory Committee who have not been able to attend regularly. So the two that I'm thinking of in particular are the League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties. And then we've tried to identify other opportunities to engage with groups that are not always at the RAC meetings, and we're also happy to do individual meetings as requested. And we have had, to that point, we've had a couple meetings with the Central Oregon Cities organization. Any other questions or comments before we get started, Jeff?
Well, I just would add to the 4 points that you outlined for us to discuss today, that one thing that I took out of the commission meeting was an open question about the role of the legislature. And while you have been tasked by the commission to do this work, I still think that there's an open question about the outcomes and policy changes that come out of this RAC and whether or not that needs to be verified or approved by the legislature.
I am perceiving that as your perspective. I will say that the department does not share that perspective. We believe that what is in the draft rules is supported by the statute. And so that'll be a future conversation when and if the legislature chooses to take it up.
That was the answer I was expecting from you, which is perfectly cool, but I do want to be consistent through our process.
Yep, understood. Okay, any other comments before we jump into the agenda?
Well, I guess I have one. So if like the in-stream interests want to have a presentation, would you be the person to contact?
I think Laura would be the person to contact.
Laura? Okay.
Yep, Laura's organizing that for us, our team.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's move to our next agenda item, which is Travis.
Good morning again. I'm Travis Brown, hydrogeologist, Groundwater section. This presentation is intended to address some feedback that we've heard under some of the items that Annette listed. We've received some feedback from RAC and public comments that we might presume hydraulic connection in some or all instances, and also heard opposition to what's been termed one-size-fits-all rules and a desire for more site-specific evaluation. And so this presentation is intended to explain first how the department makes a determination of hydraulic connection and hopefully to highlight the site-specific nature of that process. First of all, why? So a reminder of the importance of hydraulic connection in this conversation. So finding of hydraulic connection is a prerequisite for finding of the potential for substantial interference and the subsequent findings around water availability that are involved. Nice, thank you. So also as a reminder, here's our proposed definition for hydraulic connection with the current definition crossed out there at the bottom. These are functionally the same. We just added or tried to revise it for clarity. So a finding of hydraulic connection is made by a hydrogeologist during the technical review for a water right application. The process that I'm going to describe today would not be changed by the proposed rules. So this is our current process, what we envision to be our process going forward. It is a very detailed site-specific evaluation based on preponderance of the evidence. So that's to say that the evidence indicates that it is more likely than not, or has a greater than 51% probability of being true. In making their determination, a hydrogeologist would consider first a conceptual model. Every technical review for a groundwater right begins with building of a conceptual model of the site. Our department hydrogeologists focus on particular areas of the state so that they can become an expert in that region and build these conceptual models based on their knowledge and experience. Included in that conceptual model would typically be any published geologic or hydrogeologic maps or reports, such as the USGS report pictured here. They would also incorporate any well logs or other information available regarding the local hydrogeology in that area. In addition to the conceptual model, they would examine groundwater and surface water elevations in the area, looking for similar elevations between groundwater and surface water, or evidence of groundwater flow toward or away from the stream system or surface water source. They would examine stream periodicity. So is a given stream flowing year round, or is it only flowing for a portion of the year typically? And then they would incorporate other relevant and available data, including information we might receive from the applicant or public comments. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk through both some examples of each of these groups of information that might be included and explain how they would influence the ultimate decision around hydraulic connection or not. One of the purposes of building our conceptual model is to examine whether the hydrogeology in that area even allows for flow between a surface water source and an aquifer. Do we have saturated conditions that exist between the stream and the given aquifer that would be tapped by a proposed well? In the bottom left here, you can see a generalized cross-section for the Willamette Valley, the Willamette Valley. And as an example, if we were to be evaluating an application for a new groundwater right in the Columbia River basalts, the Yale Hills in the middle of the cross-section there, we likely would not find hydraulic connection with the South Yamhill River to the west, because the Columbia River basalts don't extend that far. So that purple unit you can see under the Yale Hills doesn't extend over the South Yamhill River. Therefore, we wouldn't expect saturated conditions between that system and the South Yamhill River. We could, however, find hydraulic connection with smaller streams that would be emanating from the springs in the highlands there. Similarly, if you look at this is a generalized profile of the structure of a typical Columbia River basalt flow on the right. We have a flow top and a flow interior that's very dense and intransmissible to water. It's a very highly effective confining unit typically. And then we expect water primarily to occur at the interflow zones. So that would be the flow bottom, any sedimentary interbeds that are underneath that, and then any underlying flow top from an underlying Columbia River basalt flow. So if you were to imagine a stream flowing along the top of this section, we likely would not find hydraulic connection between the underlying aquifer and that stream flowing on top, because it hasn't incised through that flow interior. There's not an effective pathway for hydraulic communication between those two. So again, we would likely not find hydraulic connection in that instance. Next slide, please. In looking at groundwater elevation data and surface water elevation data, the hydrogeologist would be looking to see first, are groundwater elevations relatively similar to the surface water elevation around a given stream? And then we would look to see whether there's a regular gradient of sloping away, sloping up or down away from that stream, and not trying to identify whether there might be any kind of sort of hydraulic breaks or air gaps around that system. If we were to look at that data and see that groundwater elevations were generally much lower than surface water elevations around the stream, that would be indicative of probably not saturated conditions underlying that stream, and so probably not a pathway for hydraulic connection.
Right. Yeah, Travis, do you have I don't know, I guess some criteria as far as what that distance is below, the stream?
I think it really would have to, it would vary based on the setting. So in some alluvial systems, like we see in the Willamette, we have a vertical gradient of head that decreases as you move down, right? And so if we were looking at the potentiometric water level deep in an alluvial system, it might look substantially different than that surface water system. But if we were to have, a series of nested piezometers that kind of allowed us to check the potentiometric water level at each elevation as we moved up closer to that stream, we would see that there is actually a relatively smooth gradient. And so if instead we saw sort of sharp breaks in that gradient, that would be more indicative of not saturated conditions all the way through there.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
I think so.
So in addition to looking at just the sort of the raw numbers of groundwater and surface water elevation, we can also look at water table or potentiometric mapping in the area to see if that shows groundwater flow moving, toward a given stream system, which would be indicative of gaining conditions in that stream, or moving away from that system, which might indicate losing conditions in that stream. So in the bottom left here, we have a water table map, again from the Willamette Valley. This is around the Little Pudding River, which you can see kind of in the middle there. These contours, much like the contours on a topographic map, are indicating lines of equal groundwater elevation. And you can see that they curve upward upstream around the Little Pudding River there. Groundwater flow tends to move perpendicular to these contours. And so we would expect groundwater to be flowing towards the Little Pudding River in that area, which would be indicative of discharge to the Little Pudding River, which is a form of hydraulic connection. By contrast, on the right-hand side, we see, oops, sorry, Justin, go back one. Oops, yeah, thanks. On the right-hand side, we can see a potentiometric map from the much deeper buried Columbia River basalt system. In the same area, we see that the contours are not nearly as responsive the groundwater elevation contours are not nearly as responsive to the stream systems that in that area. Groundwater flow instead is following a much more regional gradient. So we likely don't see hydraulic connection in those systems. Okay, thank you. Another piece of evidence that we would look at is stream periodicity. So what's the duration during the year that a given stream would typically flow? In the top left here, we have an example of an ephemeral stream. So this is a stream that flows pretty much directly in response to heavy precipitation. Its channel is, for the most part, entirely above the water table in the given area. We would likely not find hydraulic connection with an ephemeral stream system because it's so far above the water table, but there's not saturated conditions there for depletion. Moving down, we see an intermittent stream. So this is a stream that flows for a portion of the year. Flow would, be on the scale of weeks to months, typically. We could potentially find hydraulic connection with an intermittent stream if the reason for its intermittency was a highly fluctuating water table. So if you imagine at the end of the rainy season, the water table is very high. We have that groundwater discharging to a limited reach of the stream. And then as that water table falls throughout the year, we dry up various reaches of that stream. So we might have a seasonal hydraulic connection in that case. However, we could also have, for instance, a perched aquifer system where we have just a lens of clay that's holding up some relatively small amount of infiltrated precipitation that's leaking out for a relatively short period of time, dissipates during the late summer, and that intermittent stream system dries up as a result. So in that case, we would likely not find hydraulic connection with that system because it's not actually connected to a wider aquifer system. And then finally, we have a perennial stream system. This is a stream that's flowing year-round in Oregon. That typically means that it has some form of groundwater discharge that's providing that base flow. When it hasn't rained in several months, the stream's still flowing. Groundwater is what's allowing it to flow. And so by and large, we would find hydraulic connection with many perennial stream systems.
There is a question online. Robin, please go ahead.
Hey, yeah, good morning. So you said that it was likely that you would not find a connection during an ephemeral stream, and I'm just wondering if there are cases or locations where you would find a connection there, because typically when we're looking for a groundwater connection with surface water, we don't even consider those that are mapped as ephemeral. So I'm wondering if there are situations where we do need to consider that.
Yeah, I can't think of one where we found hydraulic connection with the ephemeral stream, so that doesn't mean that it isn't possible, but I find it very, very, very unlikely, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Travis, for the intermittent streams, it's kind of been my understanding that part of your analysis would look to see if there's any other water rights from this intermittent stream, and if there were, then you would in fact consider that in your hydraulic connection analysis. Is that
Potentially,
or?
Yeah, I think that relates to, there's been some I don't know, discussion about what constitutes a surface water source. And so at least one indication of something being a surface water source is having a water right on it. Someone's used it. So that sort of makes it by definition a source. That doesn't inherently mean that there's hydraulic connection with groundwater in that case, though, because, for instance, it could be damp, reservoir releases that are allowing it to flow for a certain portion of the year, snow melt in certain parts of the state.
Thank you.
Zach?
Yeah, thanks, Travis. This is really interesting. A couple of papers like Cartwright and others 2020 found that as groundwater levels decline, streams and surface water bodies can shift from being perennial to intermittent to ephemeral. So does this approach, if chronic groundwater declines have led to a stream becoming ephemeral, does this approach not consider that those groundwater declines cause the periodicity status itself?
That's a fair question. I think we perhaps somewhat disconnect the conversation around declines, which we focused as more of a storage focused conversation, from one around hydraulic connection, which is much more related to capture from a stream system. So at least in this context, what we're trying to look at is whether groundwater pumping would deplete stream flow. So if declines have already dried up that region of the stream, there's really not stream flow to be depleted, I guess, in that instance. So at least under this part of the analysis, I think we would base it on the condition of the stream at that point in time, at the point when we're making the analysis.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That makes sense. So it's forward-looking, but it does not take into consideration why or how some of these streams may have become intermittent or ephemeral.
I think that's relatively fair to say. And I mean, yeah, and on the upper right here, I have a list of the data sources that we're looking at to ascertain the periodicity of a given stream. One of those sources is topographic maps. We particularly are interested sometimes in older topographic maps where there was some form of field verification. But as you say, things can change over time. So in addition to that, we also looked at the National Hydrographic Data Set, the NHD. We'll get aerial imagery to see if we can actually see water in that given stream channel. We can look at LiDAR data to see if there's a defined stream channel that's indicative of water flowing through that and eroding away surface sediments. And then, of course, we can always rely on field observation if department staff get out there, observe the site, and seeing if it's dry during a portion of the year or not.
Greg?
Yeah, and some of the work that I've done recently for water right applications, we kind of discovered that the topo maps that the department was relying on showed stretches of stream to be perennial, where they were not shown to be perennial on the older maps. And I mean, these are significant changes, and so I actually spent some time kind of digging into that to try and find out why there was the difference there. And what I discovered was that and I believe it's the newer maps, the updated USGS topo maps, The stream periodicity is based largely on, I think, this national hydrographic data set, which when it comes down to it, I think when I finally dug into it, all of that data set is basically, it's not based on, you know, like field observations. It's based on classifying streams according to some kind of stream order classification, based on the way the streams are branching. So, and you know, for example, you know, they're going to look at a certain branch of the stream, and because of just this stream order classification, they would assign, you know, a certain type of, you know, whether it's intermittent or perennial or whatever, to that stream and then change it on the map from the old map to the new map. And so it's sort of like this method that they're using, in my mind, is kind of fictional, as opposed to, you know, real data, field observed measurements. And in one case that I was looking at, I mean, the new map didn't even correspond to the water level data. And so I guess I just want to, point that out. And I asked the department to what extent they acknowledge that issue, and caution the, you know, reliance on the national hydrographic data set for, you know, determining stream periodicity.
Sure. Yeah, no, we are aware of that issue. As I said, in looking at least the topo maps, we tend to look at the older topo maps, which seem to be more based on field verification. We are aware. I would not characterize the NHD as fictional, but at least as it's a model for assessing stream periodicity.
So can I add to that real quick? So I think what you're saying, Greg, is true, but not the whole story. I mean, I believe that there are field observations that go in the NHD, and the NHD is, I'll really generalize it, crowdsourced, right? There are a number of stewards that get some sort of designation, like the department has a steward, but ODFW has a steward, and US Fish and Wildlife has a steward. All these agencies have people that are authorized to provide data to the NHD, and not all agencies have the same missions and therefore are looking at the same, you know, the definitions are gradational, right? So the NHD is a valuable piece of information, and it is the official piece of information, right? Like the USGS says, we published these topos, they are replaced by the NHD. So we do look at that as a data source, but as you know, we've had discussions about this, and we also appreciate that the old topos, for the most part, our understanding is they are field referenced and have they're one agency, they're the USGS, and they've gone out and they field reference and they've made a finding one way or the other, and details abound. The thing I want to point out is we use all these sources and look at them. As I hope you'll nod along, if there's a difference of opinion, we have a discussion and we work out something that at least is understood. If not, everybody agrees. We understand how we got to the finding we made. And these are very, I want to bring it back down to the big question, which is these are very site-specific determinations that take a lot of local information into account. And the way that we're doing it now, the reason we can have this in-depth discussion is because you have past history with it, right? The way we're doing it now is the way we're going to do it in the future. So these particular allocation rules aren't changing how we assess hydraulic connections. So from the perspective of how will we do this in the future under the new rules, I hope that folks can feel comfortable that they have a feeling, like the people that are really agreeing with it, how we're doing it now and how we've done it for the past couple decades and moving forward is how we intend to do it in the future. So, is that fair?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm glad to hear that, that there's, you're willing to kind of look at everything and have discussions about this, because I guess there have been times in the past where I kind of felt like there really wasn't that opportunity, that it was kind of like, okay, this is what we're using and that's what you got to live with. So, I mean, I really do. I appreciate what you're telling me or telling us out here.
well, and I hope that as time has gone, like I can think of a particular instance where we've gone back and forth and made a finding. So I guess I just wanna, I wanna emphasize that the opportunity for discussion and additional information around a particular water right application exists today and will exist into the future. So, great.
Thank you.
Mike, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to that, and Justin, feel free to chime on this, or anybody else from OWRD staff, but is there another bullet here as far as the data sources, you know, something that's desirable, that's off in the distance? You know, Justin, is there some sort of satellite-based technology in the future that, you know, the department would be using on a more regular basis that would, you know, change how this could be done in the future? Sorry to stretch your brain a little bit, but I want to do that under sort of this context of, are there tools and resources that staff would really love to have that would really be helpful in these sort of, you know, rules advisory committees that they don't have right now? And, you know, that's good information for all of us on this RAC to have, so that we can walk away with, you know, something to make actionable, you know, to help get the tools and resources that you all need to take these things to the next level. So I guess I'll kind of back up. Is there another couple of bullets here under the data sources here that you would love to add, if you could be king for a day?
I'm having trouble thinking right off the top of my head of something that I am aware of that would help us with a hydraulic connection finding that is not on here, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist, just that I'm not.
Well, this is Ivan Gall, you know, additional data that we use when we're doing hydraulic connection issues, what we call seepage runs. So detailed analysis of losing reaches or gaining reaches. Oregon State University, also looked around at technology, which was fiber optic cable that was dropped continuously in a stream to look at water temperature variations, which can give insight to areas of the stream bed where we're getting gains, usually from groundwater. We'll see a temperature decrease. Both of those are pretty labor intense, and to think that we could roll that out across the state for all of the stream systems is not very realistic with today's resource availability. So.
Thank you for commenting. That's really the larger context of the speech, Ivan, of what I was getting at, is just helping us understand where we can be helpful as a RAC for you all as a department. Thanks.
Okay, do I cover the relevant data? Oh, April, I did not see your card up. My apologies. Go ahead.
No problem. And as other comments and questions have come in, I probably have more to say, but couple thoughts, questions. So I'm hearing you guys as far as this information that you're providing about the hydraulic assessment. There's no plans to change how that is done currently. This is more just for our edification, and I see how it goes into the rules. But being that I am more focused on policy and not a hydrologist like you guys are, so I apologize if it's a silly question, but one of my questions is how many how many subbasins have current data on the hydraulic connections that you've done assessments on, that where you can feel that we know? Or, you know, is that something where there are certain areas that you would like to have more information, and there's applications that come up that it would be helpful to have more data? I may not have framed that as very well, but what I'm trying to get at is both understanding how good of data we have about this currently, but also because I think some of the comments that perhaps I've made that were referenced earlier about my concerns on these rules, I don't think we need to look at it as a binary thing as far as stop the rulemaking, don't stop the rulemaking, wait until 2018 is implemented or not. I think there's things, lots of gray areas in between, and I already plan to, well, like with many other folks, have conversations with other stakeholders and legislators about the ongoing need for the Water Resource Department to have better data. That's always been something we've been very supportive of, and I think what concerns me is that we're not necessarily focusing on the areas where we both need better data, groundwater and surface water, as well as have a need, i.e. there are applications or transactions coming up that are pushing that need to better identify connections, levels and stuff in that area, because I think if we had a better sense of that, then we could strategically approach this to say, oh, well, in this subbasin, we really could use some of these nested piezometers or whatever those are called, or different things like that, trying to get at that from one angle. And then second question would be, how are canals specifically, I'm thinking of irrigation district canals, how are they treated in this assessment process? And that question was raised because I am aware that the National Hydrographic data set does allow for crowdsourcing, as you put it, Justin, and there is the ability for that to be changed, which is both good and bad, but there are district canals that are improperly mapped as being waterways, and many of our folks have found that out as they're going through different projects, and it's a rather arduous process sometimes to change those designations, but I think that also gets at where we need maybe better data as well. So it's a twofold question.
Do you want me to answer? I can answer the last part relatively quickly.
Yeah, go for it,
yeah. Yeah, so in relation to canals, that's an understandable concern. It is something that we do sometimes struggle with in areas where natural stream channels have been channelized and basically repurposed, sometimes as water conveyance systems. We are generally assessing hydraulic connection against what is a surface water source, right? So one that somebody could apply for a right from and appropriate water from. That typically is not true of canals, right? Those are private systems that somebody can't just dig their own ditch into and pull water out of and claim a right off of that. So to the extent that we can identify those as purely artificial, then yes, we are not going to find hydraulic connection with those. Where we have a channelized stream system, it does get a little more complicated, and it would be up to the reviewing hydrogeologist to determine whether there is, a groundwater connection with that system, and I guess whether it is available for appropriation. So.
All right, so as far as data goes, we have some amount of data everywhere in the state. So I don't believe that there's any place in the state where we don't have some information that we can then use best professional judgment on to make a determination. The more data we have, the more precise we can be with a determination with timing and magnitude. But yes or no, groundwater supports stream flow as base flow. We have some information, I believe, again, everywhere. So it's a matter of degree. And then I think the question becomes purpose of use, right? Like for this assessment, what we want to know is if somebody is applying for a new groundwater right, does the groundwater system that they are targeting discharge to and support a surface water source that has a senior user on it? And then we get into the PSI and specific and substantial interference question about whether that rises to a level of yea or nay, right? But for the hydraulic connection, it's is groundwater tributary to surface water? That's the finding. And so I feel that we have the information we need to make that finding everywhere. Now, examples of where we might need or want more information, if somebody wants a more timed right? I'm gonna get a right up close to a stream bank filtration, and I'm only gonna pull water when it's available in the winter. We would need more information on the periodicity and perhaps the magnitude. And we can always gather that data as we need it for the particular application. But in general, I don't believe that we are lacking data to make an appropriate assessment on a case-by-case basis of this finding to the required level of confidence, which is preponderance of the evidence. So we'll look at available data and we'll use our professional judgment again in a site-specific way to make that finding. So does that answer your question?
I'll have some additional questions.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, Justin, I think basically what you're saying is that you're just trying to determine whether there is or is not hydrologic or HC, hydraulic connection, excuse me. You're not concerned really with, as you said, timing or you know, the amount of hydraulic connection or the effectiveness of the hydraulic connection or so you just basically, it's is or it isn't. That's really what you're going at.
That's right, at this stage, and like, just to be clear, this is one stage of a multi-stage first hydraulic connection. It's a prerequisite for a finding of potential for substantial interference. That's a prerequisite for looking to see if water is available and whether there's substantial interference. So it's.
Any other questions before we go back to other relevant data sources? Okay, back to you, Travis.
Great, thank you. So yeah, some other information that we might use in assessing hydraulic connection. One water level time series, so we could look at areas where we have stream gauge data and relatively high frequency groundwater measurements. So we could look to see if, you know, as flood pulses move down that stream, if we can see corresponding responses, increases in the groundwater level. That can also be useful for assessing the diffusivity of that system, which is a factor that controls how quickly things move throughout that groundwater system. In addition to that, we could look at seepage runs, as Ivan mentioned, where you're measuring discharge as you move downstream. And if you don't see, you know, if you see an increase in stream flow and you don't see obvious tributaries bringing in surface water around that, that would be indicative of groundwater discharging into that system. We can look at stream bed temperature profiling because groundwater maintains a relatively consistent temperature throughout the year. We can look, you know, with thermal cameras or distributed temperature sensors for the fiber optic cables to see if there's, you know, hot or cold spots in a stream that contrast with the typical stream temperature. Those might be indicative of groundwater contributions. And then there's a number of hydrogeochemical parameters that we could look at to assess the similarity between groundwater and surface water. You know, we can use isotopes to try to age date that water in some instance, the groundwater in some instances, to assess how long it's been in that system, how far it is from its recharge, and look at major ion concentrations and things of that nature. So yeah, in summary here, I want to reemphasize, we are not presuming hydraulic connection. We are making a site-specific determination in each case between a given surface water source and a given well. We are, you know, these assessments are very site-specific and evidence-based, and our, you know, assessment process for hydraulic connection would not be changed by the proposed rules. And so people, as Justin said, people familiar with the department's process for making these findings now should expect relatively similar findings if these proposed rules were adopted.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I just have a kind of simple comment, I guess. So thank you, Travis. It's all really helpful. First of all, I think everyone on the RAC, and especially from the department, knows that, you know, I'm here really focused on the Deschutes Basin. And while we're interested in Division 9 in this conversation, you know, the groundwater mitigation rules specifically say that if you provide mitigation, Division 9 does not apply. So I hope everybody knows that. But maybe you're going to get to this, but I kind of feel like we're dancing around the issue here, which is, from my understanding, working with Division 9 for many years, it's not so much that you're changing how you're going to determine hydraulically connected. It's really the change to the rules, right? There used to be a lot of presumptions and legal presumptions for how Division 9 worked. And so there were cases where, you know, you in the first instance might find hydraulic connection, but there would still be a pathway to get a groundwater permit. And I'm just saying, for better or worse, but I hope everyone understands it's not so much about how you're going to determine hydraulic connection. It's really how the rules are changing by taking out the presumption and adding things like considering senior rights and regulation. And I'm trying to think of the whole laundry. That's the game changer, not so much how you're going to determine.
We've got the draft rule language in our next.
So I mean, that's, you know, for people that are concerned that I've heard about Division 9, it's more about that, I think. And maybe less about what we've been talking about. So I just want to make sure that we're gonna have that discussion.
Yes, so, yes, we will have that discussion, and certainly the rule language for potential for substantial interference has changed.
Yeah.
This is to address comments we've heard of, well, you're gonna presume everything's hydraulic connected. We wanna make sure that we address that. I mean, to the hyperbolic that I've heard of, you're gonna be connected with water in Brazil or whatever, like, we wanna make sure that we are reiterating how it works today and re-emphasizing that it will work the same into the future, so.
And so, very pertinent to that comment. Thank you, Adam. So here's our proposed rule language, just to kind of highlight again that, the pathway where we move from this finding of hydraulic connection to the substantial interference, and then assess, the state of a given hydraulically connected stream system to determine whether that would actually constitute substantial interference or undue interference. And I think the reason we feel this is appropriate in part is because the science and the conceptual models tell us that where we have hydraulic connection, and if you are pumping groundwater indefinitely, that pumping will deplete that stream system. So it's not a matter of if it's, once we've determined that it's hydraulically connected, that pumping will deplete that stream system eventually. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Zach has his hand up and I didn't notice it earlier. Zach, please go ahead, and then Jeff, I'll come to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, this is about the prior slide, I think. Travis, first off, really do appreciate your presentation. This is definitely filling an information gap that we've heard over and over again in these committee meetings about how hydraulic connection works. So I think we needed this. And I think this presentation has really shown that these are very site-specific determinations. One thing that you kind of quickly jumped over that I'm just curious to learn more about is how you use specific conductance as a tracer for base flow or groundwater contributions. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, so I'm going to preface this. I'm not an expert in that particular process, but essentially the specific conductance is going to give us an indication of how much of a stream's flow is comprised of groundwater discharge. It will not give us, sort of a tracer to say exactly where that groundwater, what aquifer system that groundwater discharge is ultimately coming from, right? So if we move further and further up gradient away from that stream system, we could encounter multiple aquifer systems along the way, and each of them could be having some proportion of contribution to that ultimate groundwater discharge to stream. And specific conductance isn't going to tell us that, but it will tell us how dependent a given stream is upon groundwater discharge.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that, Zach, toward the end when we're talking about the House Bill 18 material for 2018. Thank you.
Okay, got it. Thanks. I'll look forward to hearing more about that.
Okay, so this is the rule language. Jeff?
Yep. So I appreciate the tutorial on the map of how you get from here to there. And there's no real, I think you've explained it really well. The question I have is, I understand how the sheets does their thing. That's an example of mitigation. Is there any trigger here for mitigation in all of this analysis? Because the way I look at it, maybe it's a hydrological report that shows the map and the applicability or availability of a mitigation component. I just don't see it, at least in my mind, where that's clearly stated that is an acceptable practice in these rules.
I think the department would need to develop a statewide mitigation program in order to create that as an acceptable practice.
Okay, but if this is gonna go in place, then should that be a concurrent item?
I think that's a potential comment to be made.
So I think I want to
That's
clarify.
not, that's not a yes, though.
I think I want to clarify something that Adam said. So I mean, the Deschutes, because they did a basin study and found, you know, broad scale hydraulic connection, like the Deschutes doesn't say that if you have mitigation, you don't have hydraulic connection. It says if you have mitigation, you don't have the potential for substantial interference, right? You're offsetting that impact through mitigation.
That's why I was trying to be really careful about the Deschutes example, because, you know, putting that as the one size fits all is not necessarily appropriate.
Sure.
But I was just curious as we get, because I looked at where this is going and what's gonna be, and then we're building the road to get there. And so I just wanted to flag that as, if we're going to have these things go into place, in my view, you have to have a mitigation tool.
And, you know, we've also had conversations about a mitigation tool. So the Deschutes program mitigates for potential for substantial interference and mitigates for surface water flows to meet scenic waterway flows as well. There are, I think, opportunities to develop groundwater mitigation programs, right? So you could develop mitigation programs for additional outcomes and objectives that we are trying to manage for.
Jeff, I've worked on mitigation projects around the state and they're rarely successful. What you're really talking about is coming up with a source of water to mitigate a future impact from a new application. And in a lot of cases, those are really hard to come up with in space and in time to mitigate for that specific impact. The Deschutes rules were built to provide and afford folks some flexibility.
Right.
So they don't provide perfect mitigation, but they do protect the scenic waterway downriver. Elsewhere in the state where we don't have mitigation rules and guidance on that, it's really a case-by-case basis, and a new groundwater applicant comes in, or someone who wants to store surface water. I'm sure Greg's been involved in some of these. Some of our sister agencies will have comments about impacts to temperature on a stream, or water quality on a stream, or fish issues on a stream. And then the applicant has to go find a source of water to mitigate their potential impact. And it's really tough to do. Who's got an existing right, in essence, to buy and move that around. So,
well, it could be the Great Capellas Full Employment Act.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to point out that if, in most cases, when the sister agencies are calling for mitigation and they're asking for, you know, basically gallon for gallon mitigation, you know, if you could come up with the mitigation, then you really wouldn't need to apply for the water right. And so it's kind of a ridiculous request by the sister agencies, in my opinion. And, you know, I mean, we've done some mitigation in the Willamette Valley in the past where an applicant had some existing surface water rights. You know, they wanted to go to groundwater because of water quality concerns. And also convenience. It's just easier for them to pump out of a well than to deal with the discharge out of this, you know, putting a pump in the stream and all that stuff. And so the department did allow in some cases, and may, I guess, under certain circumstances, still allow the cancellation of these surface water rights to mitigate for proposed new groundwater use. So, I mean,
it's happened. It's just tough to get all the pieces to line up to get it across the finish line.
yeah, and we've done it a few times. Then I kind of heard that the department wasn't doing it anymore. And then I had a discussion with Dwight and he says, well, you know, we might still look at it. It's kind of a case by case basis, it sounds like. But that really, outside of that and what's happening in the Deschutes Basin, there really isn't anything out there, I don't think, for mitigation.
So we added the rule language to these slides, and I just want to acknowledge that we haven't changed anything on the prior language that the RAC has reviewed. So I think, I don't know that we need to go over the specifics of the language again, but they are here, but I kind of wanted to maybe move to why we care about this issue, which is really demonstrated in the slide after the rule language. Unless I'm looking for folks in the RAC. Do we want to go over the rule language again? It's the same as what you've seen before. Okay. Go ahead.
There it is. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I do have one related question, and it's a pretty specific thing here that's related to finding a hydraulic connection, but you know, the rules have been changed so that, you know, the current rules, you know, have certain distances, right? You've got a minimum of a quarter mile, basically. I mean, if you're hydraulically connected and you're within a quarter mile, there's an automatic assumption of the potential for substantial interference. If you're with, you know, between that quarter mile and a mile, you know, then there's some other criteria that are applied. And if you can pass all of those, then you can get a permit. If you're beyond a mile, then, you know, the department really doesn't even look at it, right? So now those distances, or at least the mile, I know is going away. Is there no longer a minimum as well as the minimum is going away? So here's my question then. If you're, say, within a mile of the Willamette, or within a quarter mile of the Willamette River or the Columbia River under these new rules, then, you know, there's probably going to be a hydraulic connection, but water's available in those streams. So is there going to be no finding of PSI in that case?
In that case, there would be a PSI finding, but not a significant interference finding. So
that would still trigger the Division 33 review then by the agencies, right? Which is a dead end right there.
Well,
that's a total dead end.
I want to say that's correct, and that was the request from the very beginning, is that we keep the PSI structure because it's cross-referenced in the Deschutes Basin Program rules, as well as the Division 33. And so we've kept that intact. So yes, and by design. So not an unintended consequence.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, this figure really is intended to highlight why we believe these proposed rules are appropriate. So this is a map of the oldest priority date to which surface waters sources were being regulated in each basin from 2018 to 2020. This is not showing that all streams in each of these basins are being regulated back to the given priority date, but really it is showing that existing surface water users are being regulated across the state. Many of those existing users have made significant investments in developing their rights. And so if more users needed to be regulated off because of the impact of additional groundwater appropriation, then the livelihoods of those users may be jeopardized. And for in-stream flow rights, entire ecosystems might be jeopardized if they're not meeting those in-stream flows. So under a prior appropriation system, it's not appropriate for new groundwater uses to be allowed if they will contribute to that need to regulate off existing surface water users.
So that is the end of our presentation on hydraulic connection and substantial interference. Other discussion before we move on. Okay, Bill has his hand up and then I'll come to you, Adam. Go ahead, Bill. Bill Yeager, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So this map is interesting, and it's I guess it provides some information, but there's a lot it doesn't provide in terms of, you know, the dates don't tell us how many water rights have older or junior dates, how many water rights were regulated off in these particular examples, but it does provide some information. But I guess given the topic of this RAC, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that you cannot, and I believe I'm right, that you cannot provide a map like this for groundwater rights, which groundwater rights also have priority dates, and in theory, junior groundwater rights. The law is written so that one might regulate off junior water rights in order to protect a senior water right. But between groundwater rights, that doesn't happen because I guess primarily of the difficulty of identifying which well is interfering with which other well.
So, regulation for seniority amongst groundwater users does happen. It typically happens either in very limited cases where you have sort of two neighboring wells right next to each other, and those the interference from one well to the other can be well characterized. Outside of that, I would say that groundwater regulation of what you're describing happens primarily in the critical areas that we've established around the state. And did that answer all your points, or was there another?
Well, it's, yeah, I mean, I think it's, my understanding of it, it's very limited, the number of times that a groundwater right is regulated for another groundwater right, despite lots of interference in some basins between and among groundwater rights, such as the Harney Basin. And that's just a difficulty of the way using prior appropriations for groundwater is like, you know, a square peg in a round hole, it seems to me.
Thank you. Adam, and then Greg.
Yeah, just, I was thinking about, you know, like what I said earlier, you know, that the real game changer is how the rules are changed. And I think that your commission, I think they understand like what the ramifications of these rules are, because we keep talking about how this is, you know, the biggest change in many, many, many decades. But maybe it would be helpful kind of on the other side of this data to help the commission and the public understand how many wells would make it past this Division 9. Like for example, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've had just a couple wells where the department has concluded it was not hydraulically connected. Okay, not very many at all. So it just seems to me that maybe kind of having additional data for the commission to understand that, you know, we reviewed 1,000 wells over the last couple of years, and 998 of them were hydraulically connected. And based on these rules, they would have gotten, you know, that they have PSI and a no. Just to, I think, let everyone understand. I think most people in this room understand that will be the outcome, but I'm not sure everyone understands like the implications of the rules. So I think that would be helpful information. I know you guys are all about information.
Tammy.
Yeah, I'm confused as to why that is actually a problem, I guess, because given the physics of the situation, it does not surprise me that the vast majority of the time, assuming that, you know, you're dealing with an aquifer and a stream that are, you know, not in Brazil or whatever, that you're finding that there's a hydraulic connection. I mean, are we talking about science here, or are we talking about wishful thinking? I don't know.
Well, I guess I'm trying to say that in the rules as they are today, you could have hydraulic connection, and based on the way the rules are set up, someone could potentially have a pathway to get a permit today. And so we're changing the rules. I just want everyone to understand, I'm not disagreeing that that's how the science works. This is more of a kind of a piece of policy information. This is the implication of the change that we're making. That's all. I just want people to understand that clearly, because sometimes when I listen to the conversation about these rules, I'm just not sure that everyone involved gets that. So I just think it'd be helpful.
And I would even say where there is hydraulic connection, it's part of why we're seeing this level of regulation, right? I mean,
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just suggesting as part of your effort to help people understand what you're doing, help them understand that.
Yep, we understand that point. Lisa, and then Greg.
And I was just saying, I know the department's done this to a certain extent, but we're gonna go down this road that Adam's suggesting, I think, not to put more work on you, but even taking an example basin and highlighting what has happened over time by issuing groundwater permits without this rule change, where we had hydraulic connection, but it was getting by through the Division 9 presumptions and potential for substantial interference. What has that done to the senior users? What has that done to the springs and the rivers and the salmon runs? And all of that damage that's basically been done by having the Division 9 rules instead of taking this approach, which is much more sensitive to that hydraulic connection issue. So I guess I would just, even like an example watershed, if we're gonna go down that road.
Greg, and then Sarah Lillifelt has joined us, and she has a comment in the chat that I would like her to share with the RAC, and then we'll come to you, April.
Okay, Greg Capillas here. So the map is interesting and it's alarming, I could say, on the surface, but what it doesn't tell us is how the regulation history has changed over time. And, so if we see the regulation history changing over time in most of these areas, mean like more regulation, well, or less, but probably unlikely to be less regulation, but more regulation over time, then that's a good indication that we've got ongoing increasing impacts from groundwater pumping that suggests that. But this doesn't tell us that. And so we don't really know, to what extent this regulation, this map really is, what's shown on this map is a function of just simply over appropriation, over allocation of surface water, by the department, historically. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, April, and then Mike, although Mike, I'm confused if you or Adam are here representing Cocoa. Just gonna be blunt.
Adam's not in the room.
And Adam just left to go to the restroom, so I will call on you, Mike. Sarah.
Yeah, my comment online was in response to Adam's comments, where, I think Adam's comments are well-founded, and I think it matters what the extent of the connection is, not just that there's an overgeneralized connection. The extent of the connection is the science, not just, hey, water's connected. And so I think that is important. And then I would also say, I guess, in response to Lisa's more recent comment, if we're gonna do kind of like case studies of, let's look at a basin where the Division 9 rules did damage, I would also say, let's look at an area where we're not experiencing the same types of stress on groundwater resources. And let's also look at what these rules would do to that area. Thanks.
Thank you, April, and then Mike.
So I just reflecting on some of the comments that have been made in the map that's up here. I agree with the comments that Bill Yeager made as far as this map not being inclusive, but I think there's a variety of maps that you could put on here. And I do think you guys could actually show us an overlay of where there's been groundwater regulation, critical groundwater areas, different things like that. But I think, that's all fairly relative in my mind, because I think it's important that at the end of this process, the people who are going to be most impacted understand the outcome, and that the state is very open and transparent and states what it is that we're doing. But I think part of what's missing also from this map, adding to things that have been said, is, as I think somebody else said, why was there regulation of the surface water rights? And I think in several areas, you have reoccurring drought, we have growing information about the impacts of climate change, and some of that is basin specific, and all of that can help inform some of this. I think, the concept of some sort of program that allows for mitigation statewide has always been a difficult one. And I would say the reason why those projects usually aren't successful is because of some of the department's approach to saying that it has to be, for example, permanent mitigation, which doesn't necessarily work. But setting that aside, I would welcome a conversation separate from that about how we do this. But I think looking forward to the slides that we're going to talk about, because, what I'm still seeing is that the burden of proof is going to fall on the groundwater applicant to prove that water is available or does not have substantial interference, and that poses a significant issue when it comes to equity, particularly in rural areas, particularly for water users who aren't, say, a rich developer or something like that. But I also think that it's important to note that all of our uses, not just agricultural, but municipal, industrial, environmental, we're all dependent on each other. And while I'm not saying that we're connected to water in Brazil, the reality is, as a wise person said many years ago, all the water we have is on this planet. It's all a matter of where it is and how we get it and the timing and the management.
Yeah, there you go.
And the management of the water that we have and when we have it is something that this state needs to be much better at, and it's all of our collective responsibility to do that. But aside from opining here on this, as we're getting into these next slides, one of the questions that I'd like you guys to answer as we're going through is, do you have similar confidence in the data that is used to make these determinations as the confidence that you claim to have in the hydraulic connection, which we're not, that's not something that's being changed, but there's different ways in which we look at things. Is it the same level of confidence that we have if there's a claim of injury? And I think, in the example of where you have two neighbors and there's a dispute over those two wells, that is a much smaller example, and probably I would assume one that you can have more reasonable confidence about the outcomes in versus making a determination, say, on the Willamette as a whole, which has a lot of different subbasins, and again, kind of trying to identify where we need more data, but it's also where we have more problems. And the last part that I'll say, and I know this isn't going to make some folks happy, but I think if we're looking at an outcome that is essentially going to shut down any new groundwater being developed, where do exempt wells come in? And I know there's a lot of questions about whether or not those are so insignificant that it doesn't matter, or whether or not it's just the reality that that's a political minefield that nobody wants to step into. But I think that those wells, my understanding, exempt wells would not be impacted by anything that we're doing. And so that potentially one of the outcomes that could come out of this, that I don't think what some of the folks who think this is awesome are hoping for, is that if you can't get a groundwater permit, just carve it up differently and do a bunch of exempt wells. And that isn't going to lead to better outcomes. And the last part I'll say is, it disappoints me that it feels like we're cherry picking certain maps or certain data sets to justify going down this path without taking a more holistic approach. And by that, I mean, groundwater does not exist by itself. We're talking about how surface water is being impacted. I've heard people say multiple times that senior water users should be supportive of these outcomes because it's going to protect us. But the reality is that I see a lot of different factors where, for example, my members who have open canals in different areas throughout the state, which are not homogeneous, are getting, they're being successful in modernizing their system and better managing their water for what they are required to do, which is deliver it to farmers and ranchers. And at the same time, we're having more pressure to put water in stream, which some of them are able to do, but others are not for a variety of reasons. And as we put that water in stream, how is that impacting the hydrograph? How is that impacting connection to groundwater? Is that being taken into effect, whether that is positive or negative impact? Because I see these scenarios where my folks are going to get pinched because they're putting water in stream. They're improving their systems from being open earthen canals to being enclosed in pipes. And at the same time, there's going to be problems with how there are changes. Let's be honest, those shallow aquifers, if there's water that is coming out of a leaky canal, it's no longer going to be leaking out of the canal when it's inside a pipe. And that's what a lot of folks are supportive of. But on the flip side, we're going to set up a scenario where people in the same area are going to be fighting over the water and pointing the fingers. And again, it leads me to only the rich people are going to be able to survive. And I don't think that's a good outcome. So that was more philosophical that I was intending, but some of this stuff gets me worked up. But
Thank you, April. Mike?
Yeah, hi, Annette. Sorry to you and the other RAC members if there was some confusion on COCO representation. I'll connect with Adam and get that straight. I don't want to subvert or rock the boat too much here. Going back to Adam's comment, though, he mentioned transparency, and I think that's one of the things that I'm struggling with, to really kind of package the impacts of this to cities and really convey that information to multiple city managers and mayors, you know. And I think that gets to a lot of the other concerns that were just mentioned here around equity, around affordability, around how we adapt to these new rules moving forward. You know, we see the regulation coming. It's just we need time to adapt, I think, in a way. And so that's just one of the things I wanted to emphasize, with transparency and additional sort of examples of how this is going to impact different regions, basins, or cities, or different user groups. Maybe it's perfectly appropriate to be putting these on, you know, some cities in across the state. I think maybe that would show that, but it might also show where a more basin-specific approach might make more sense. So those are my two comments. Sorry, I'll connect with Adam here and make sure that we're a little bit more aligned. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach?
I just wanted to quickly say that I thought Greg's point was an interesting one, and it would be interesting to see a map of water conflict trends over time and whether that co-varies with either increased consumptive use from groundwater or increased groundwater right allocations. I'm not suggesting that if it's difficult, but if it's something that the department already has easy access to data and can whip that up quickly, I'd be interested in seeing that at least.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else on this piece before we move on to reasonably stable water levels?
Is it okay for me to ask for clarification?
Sure.
So April, I think you said you thought the burden of proof was on the applicant. Was that in the hydraulic connection process that you thought that? Or?
no,
Oh, okay.
that's in the broader.
Okay, just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, and I, again, because I haven't said that, I've also enjoyed the presentation. I thought it's been very informative.
Thank you. Do people want to take a break or carry on? Okay, we will be taking a 5-minute break. It is now 10:01. So please come back in 5 minutes and we will move on to our next agenda item. Thank you.
I mute the speaker, only the letter I sent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mute the recording. It's because I don't trust myself, you know. And Justin.
Well, actually, did you?
Yeah.
April, I appreciate you acknowledging the snacks. There are people who support this effort who are not in this room, who I just want to acknowledge. And one is definitely our IT team, who was here early this morning to get all this working for us. And then our executive assistant to make sure that we are well caffeinated and sugared up, and makes all those coffees for us in the back open. So it is definitely a team effort.
We appreciate them.
So we are going to move on. I think we touched on sort of the objectives of and the high level overview of the methodology that the department used for establishing the reasonably stable groundwater level values. We have done more work on that in terms of internal peer review. We are also seeking USGS peer review, and wanted to share more of the specifics with this group. And so that is the intention of this next agenda item. And we have, let's see how many slides we have. I want to allocate 45 minutes to this agenda item if that's realistic, and there are 18 slides. So just to let everybody know, that's kind of where we're headed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, who has done all of this fantastic work.
Thanks, Annette. And done it in partnership with others in the department, really appreciating all the feedback we've gotten so far. And as Annette noted, this work that I'm about to present has gone out for peer review from the USGS, and we're also seeking feedback from the RAC. I'm going to present this analysis, still on the previous slide, of groundwater levels that informs the proposed definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels. It's not everything that the department's considering, but it's a key part. I'll be responding to a few points of feedback that have been provided by the RAC. First, some RAC members have expressed concern about whether the proposed thresholds for total declines reflects the current best understanding of groundwater in Oregon, and whether it's appropriate to be applied across a variety of hydrogeologic settings statewide. I'll demonstrate how the threshold may be set considering a modern analysis that incorporates water level behavior from the spectrum of hydrogeologic settings around the state. This analysis nonetheless yields results that are broadly consistent across the basins of the state. At the same time, we've preserved the opportunity to redefine reasonably stable groundwater levels in basin program rules, and even added flexibility since the last RAC meeting for acceptable thresholds to be developed through that process, and Justin will talk more about that. Second, some RAC members have expressed concern over the economic burden and equity issues around data collection in areas where insufficient data are available to us to determine whether water levels are reasonably stable or not at the time of application. So the next slide, let's review the goals that the department seeks to balance with this proposed definition listed here. Findings should be generally consistent with hydrogeologic interpretation. They should avoid switching unnecessarily between reasonably stable and not, because those oscillations and findings can create uncertainty in a prior appropriations framework. That applies both within the dynamically stable range, when the test should consistently classify water levels as reasonably stable, and it should also be sensitive to declines when those declines are consistently occurring, and therefore, in those cases, continue to indicate water levels as not reasonably stable. The difficulty is that data aren't always clearly in either of these camps, showing a combination of declines and recovery. The proposed definition adds some consistency and objectivity to making those determinations, but I'll underscore that no rule-based definition can be perfect all the time, because it can't fully address the question of whether we expect declining water levels to recover or not. The definition should limit and define what constitutes sufficient data, so that applicants can know what may be required to establish water availability. This issue isn't part of the following presentation I'm going to make, but I want to mention a response that addresses RAC members' concerns about the costs associated with collecting additional data. That is, the largest cost associated with collecting those groundwater data is drilling the well,
We expect that in most cases where data are insufficient to run the reasonably stable test, there will be a well near enough that those measurements in that other well would apply to the same groundwater reservoir. And because reasonably stable is defined with respect to a groundwater reservoir or part of one, those nearby measurements could qualify to establish reasonably stable in a proposed but undrilled well on application. So there's an opportunity for applicants to partner with their neighbors to measure water levels in an existing well before investing in drilling an entirely new one.
Jeff, Jeff is eager to comment on this.
Well, I, just because my ignorance is so vast, how much does it cost to drill a well?
Well, it just varies so much depending on, you know, how much casing goes in and how the diameter of the casing is a huge factor. Cause I mean, the biggest cost is the amount of steel that goes in that well. So depth, diameter, you know, those are all big factors, but a big irrigation well in the Willamette Valley can cost easily $100,000.
Yeah, I mean, the sentence before I spasmed, my hand up, then you said, you know, you could look at existing wells before you have to drill a new one.
Yes.
But I just wanted to clarify that, so thank you.
Thanks. Finally, the proposed definition should be transparent and easy to implement. The next slide.
Gabby has her hand up.
Sorry, so you changed the wording on that third bullet between the first and the second versions, and I just want to clarify. I mean, I think, you know, I understand what you're saying, but the whole point of this analysis, right, is to be able to distinguish between those things that we're going to call, you know, oscillations within this dynamically stable range and other declines that would be then things that we want to avoid making worse or use to show where pumping has already had an effect. Is that accurate? Okay.
So thank you. That's a great point. These goals are intention. You can't do all of these things perfectly all the time.
Yes.
And the proposed rules are the department's attempt to show balance between those objectives. And the presentation that I'm making today primarily addresses this second bullet, keeping water levels consistently stable when water levels are in the dynamically stable range.
And I want to acknowledge Sarah making a comment in the chat. Sarah, do you want to present it?
I can read it. Partnering with your neighbor. This relies on a huge assumption that private property owners will let you do 5 years of testing from their wells. Also, 5 years of consultant fees is not insignificant.
Yep, noted. Thank you. Go ahead.
Let's go to the next slide. This slide reviews the major components of the proposed definition relative to this presentation, including a few changes since the last RAC meeting. First, the rate of decline is tested among a range of averaging windows, and the shallowest among those is compared against the threshold value. That threshold value was proposed as 1/2 foot per year in the RAC 6 meeting, but we've abstracted it to a variable while this work that I'm presenting now is undergoing technical review by the USGS. We don't anticipate significant changes, but we're open to them depending on the outcome of that peer review. Second, the total rate of decline is compared against the threshold value. As with the rate test, the maximum allowed total decline has been abstracted since the last RAC meeting pending peer review, but we don't expect it to change significantly. In addition, the reference level has been modified since that meeting from what was the highest known to now the pre-development water level. And this addresses the comment that was made already today about the impact of canal lining as well as artificial recharge projects that can increase the water level above the pre-development level. Though in most cases, we broadly expect them to be the same.
Adam and then Lisa.
I know pre-development is not, or at least I don't see a definition yet. So I'm just, pre-human development, pre-irrigation district development, I just don't know what it, the day before the well was constructed, I'm hoping that we can define that.
Okay, and if you have suggestions, please send them to us.
Well, I guess I'm wondering what the department staff are thinking it means today? And you
Yeah,
put it in a
sure,
rule, so you
sure.
must have an idea what it means.
So we're trying to respond to the comment that Lake Billy Chinook was built in the fifties and water levels in the vicinity rose tens of feet, right? And that can exist in response to development. And right now we're thinking that's gonna be another best professional judgment on an application by application basis. And we're taking all pertinent information into account. So if the applicant wants to provide information, we'll take that into account. If a commenter protestant wants to make a comment on that, we'll take that into account. So we expect this to be, you know, the minority of cases, first of all, and it's going to be very subjective based on, you know, Lake Billy Chinook is a lot different than the arm of a unlined canal that may or may not affect water levels. So we haven't specifically defined it beyond this, and we're depending on professional judgment and discussion on an application by application basis. And I'll end with Annette's, if you think that there's a better definition or a better term or a definition of that term, we're happy to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Lisa, did you have a comment on this? Your
Just
hand went
a
up.
rare moment of agreement with Adam.
Okay.
I might need a little more.
And Zach, I saw your hand went up and then it went down. Did you have something you wanted to add here?
Simply that I understand this is a minority of cases, and I appreciate the best professional judgment being applied. I think pre-development sets a very strange standard that I think will be difficult to support. So I understand the intent. I don't have a great, I'll think about alternative phrases here to suggest, but I don't think pre-development will work, because I think that, as Adam suggests, that could mean a lot of different things, and actually having pre-development data is vanishingly unlikely for groundwater levels.
Thank you. Tammy, did you have a
Well,
comment?
I was just thinking, isn't it in your memo, Ben, that you have an actual, what point you're using for pre-development in any given time series? Is that gonna come up later, is all I'm saying.
Not particularly. The analysis that I'm presenting looks at any previous existing water level in the wells. It doesn't attempt to do this comparison of pre-development versus highest known, because it's looking at wells that are not declining in the long run, and it removes their long-term linear trend anyway. So it's not a particularly relevant issue for the analysis that I'm going to show.
Greg?
Well, you know, highest known could be anomalous, you know, or it could be the result of unusually high precipitation in a given year and wouldn't necessarily be representative of, you know, what you would expect the water level to be prior to development. And so, yeah, to me, as highest known is really not a very good reference point to start with.
It would be helpful if you would offer some suggestions.
I mean, I'm not taking issue with pre-development. I'm just trying to point out that the highest known is not a good reference point for a
Understood.
number of reasons. Yeah.
Yep, and I think that's what we were trying to address with this language, and I'm understanding concerns with the pre-development language. So again, if there are other suggestions, we're certainly open to them, and we will also be evaluating other options among our staff. So with that, let's move on.
Last two bullets: sufficient data is defined as having 4 measurements spanning 5 years, and findings reasonably stable or not may persist over 5 years of breaks in data collection. Next slide.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm gonna have a comment on this one, so.
Okay.
On which one? On the dynamic stable? Okay, noted. You're first up, Tammy. Go ahead, Ben.
The concept that the department leverages for the sake of setting thresholds in the proposed definition is this one: dynamically stable range, which Justin has presented in previous presentations using the same diagram. The dynamically stable range here is the light blue shading in the time series graph. Ooh, it's visible. It's kind of looks gray there. It's the mostly horizontal bar near the top. Thank you. Yeah. Within that range, the blue water level cartoon fluctuates up and down frequently compared with the timescale for management. And importantly, that dynamically stable range remains constant with time. In contrast, the red and the other hydrographs that show initial declines illustrate expected results from other management approaches that don't maintain reasonably stable groundwater levels, so are not consistent with statutory direction. The premise of the following analysis is that the thresholds for the proposed definition of reasonably stable should align with the dynamically stable range. That is, they should account for observed fluctuations in wells that remain stable over long periods of time. One challenge is that wells around Oregon show a wide variety of dynamically stable behavior. Keeping the thresholds in the proposed rules loose enough to encompass all of it would fail to account for other objectives of the proposed definition, like being sensitive enough to detect consistent declines. More on that to come. Now's a good time for your comment.
Okay, Tammy and then Adam.
Oh, I don't have.
Yeah, I just actually, Laura helped me with her finger on one of them, but I did have one comment, because I mean, you showed a version of this graph back when we first talked about this dynamically stable concept. And this management time horizon confuses me a little bit, because isn't it true that normally the management time horizon is forever? I mean,
Yeah, so we probably should have grayed out that terminology with the hard break. That relates to the paper this came from, and the assumption that this is changes you can make now to have positive outcomes in the future. Right, so the management time horizon is what we're doing now to set up the rules.
oh, it's not the length of the permit or something.
Right,
like that.
correct, and it's
Okay,
intended to,
that clarifies
you know,
things.
take
I'm-
us forward in a
Okay. I'm gonna apologize in advance for undermining your desire to get through these.
Well, actually, I would say, I really appreciate the discussion.
Yeah.
So I don't wanna, I don't wanna short circuit that, but I do want us to keep moving.
So next slide. Here are the key elements of the analysis used to estimate properties of the dynamically stable range. First, we started by filtering over 10,000 wells in Oregon with multiple annual high water levels to look for those that are correlated with precipitation and show limited long-term declines. In Oregon, precipitation cycles most strongly with periods of around a decade, and these decadal cycles drive cycles in groundwater levels observed in many wells. The 234 wells included in this analysis that passed those filters may also have had some anthropogenic influence, such as when reduced precipitation drives additional groundwater pumping, both of which tend to lower groundwater levels. This means that this analysis isn't restricted to natural fluctuations. However, the combination of long periods of record showing limited long-term declines and correlation with precipitation means that you can, in individual wells, capture multiple cycles of decline and recovery that can be used to define the dynamically stable range, because they're consistent with this expectation that such declines could be followed by recovery. Water level fluctuations in different settings correlate with precipitation records averaged over different backward-looking time windows. This averaging time reflects both aquifer properties and the distance between the recharge zones and observation wells. The analysis here allows correlation with precipitation averaged over any period between 2 and 10 years, which offers flexibility to account for the specific hydrogeology at play in wells around the state without imposing that we know what that should be.
Okay, before you move on, Zach has his hand up.
Similarly, Annette, just tell me to shut up if these questions are taking too much time. But Ben, I appreciated this analysis. My specific question is on what you just said, the correlation with precipitation that you averaged between 2 and 10 years ago. Did you consider doing like a partial autocorrelation function to figure out which time lag for each well actually corresponded most closely with the well level fluctuations, and then correlating the precipitation specific to that well, rather than, my concern is if you just average the precipitation over the past 2 to 10 years, you're kind of buffering out specific time lags that might be most relevant to a given well.
I think the clarification is that I created time lagged time series of precipitation for 2 years, of time lag, and then 3 years averaging, and then 4 years, and then 5 years, and I compared all 8 of those against each well. And if any of those precipitation records correlated sufficiently with the well's water level record, then I called it sufficiently correlated to be included in this analysis. So it didn't require deciding which was the best time period of averaging of precipitation for any particular well. It just allowed for any of those averaging windows to give a correlation match. Does that address your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I didn't realize that when I read your analysis. And so there are some of these wells and these clusters are correlated with different time lags, like 2, 5, or 10.
And I'll show some examples that show that, so what the best fit time lag was in the header of the figures.
That's giving you a thumbs up. I know you
Yep,
don't
thank
have.
you.
Tammy, did you have a question or
Yeah, I
a
have a
comment?
question on this initial screening for the long-term rate of decline. Again, I just want to understand exactly what was done. So how did you, like, two questions, how did you determine that long-term rate of decline, which of course would have been based on different lengths of record, right? And the second question is, did you ever find a well where there was a long-term rate of increase?
I required a minimum of 25 annual high water levels. That's at least a 24-year period. And the long-term best fit trend was used with a least squares linear best fit. And so if that was either declining less than half a foot per year or not declining or increasing, and there were a couple of examples of increasing wells, those were included in the analysis.
So that's a good sign though, because if you're trying to pull out wells that really are dynamically stable, you'd expect some of them to be increasing, right?
Yes, that's true. And in order to make this analysis as restricted as possible, or as directed as possible towards evaluating properties of what a stable well should look like, I actually removed the best fit trend from all the wells before doing the following analysis. So they all were like corrected towards being long-term stable, even though it's not actually what was observed. The idea was this looks close enough to stable that we can treat its oscillations as such, and let's find the properties of what it would have looked like if it was perfectly stable.
And part of where I was going with this is that, you know, you picked out this less than half a foot, and maybe that's where this comes from, but it seems to me that based on the distribution of the trends that you got, right, you could actually apply something that, you know, you're using as like, this could be 0, right? So that you can give a threshold that is significantly different from 0 based on all this distribution that you would have gotten, right? Or no?
I'm not quite understanding the question yet.
All right.
So can we maybe encourage a conversation between you and Ben? We're happy to schedule that. And I'll also note that the entire write-up was sent out to the group, so.
Thanks. Other questions? We're carrying.
Carry on.
All right, still on the same slide though. I did want to, I guess I noted that it removed the best fit trend. The last point is that the similar wells were clustered into 106 groups to limit their ability to overwhelm the resulting sample of water level behavior. So if you think of 2 nearby wells that are measuring effectively the same water level trend, this analysis treats them as if they're the same well and represents their attributes using the mean of their components. Good, next one. So let's look at a few examples of how this analysis gets applied to particular wells. This is Deschutes 3016, a well that we looked at in previous RAC meetings. The black stars and line indicate the water levels, which is also the left y-axis. The blue dashed line is the regional precipitation on the right y-axis. This well is one that we know based on independent analysis that is strongly driven by precipitation cycles, and the best fit correlation was with the 6-year average precipitation you can see in the title there. Despite the fact that it's a relatively modest correlation, R² is only 0.22 with that precipitation record. Applying the rate and total decline tests as in the proposed definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels we measure a total decline of about 20.8 feet and a rate of 0.3 feet per year for this well.
And just clarification, okay, so you're 20.8, and I tried to actually work this out with the scale, but I wasn't sure. Is that the total range from your minimum, your maximum, or is it like the biggest drop from a high to a subsequent low?
The latter.
Okay, and then the rate of 0.3 feet per year that you're associating with 1995 here, how far back in time do you go to get that number?
Anything between 5 and 20 years. Those are the limits allowed in the rate.
Okay,
test.
so that's where, and is it like a linear trend again, or is it just taking 2 points?
In this case, I'm using the send slope to find
Okay.
those benefit slopes.
And if I remember right, you take the minimum of those?
Exactly. Thank you.
Ben, what's your understanding of what's happening there towards the tail end of that hydrograph?
Oh, that's a good question that we could dive deep into, and I'm not best positioned to give a detailed interpretation in this well, and I haven't attempted to dive that deep given the sample size for all of these wells. It's possible that there's some influence of additional groundwater pumping through there. I don't know the full story though.
I guess as we get into the overall comments on this, that's one of Coco's concerns based on some consulting with a hydrogeologist that helps us out, that understanding the data behind these hydrographs, especially, effects like this towards the end of the hydrograph, I think are really important to understand. And I'm hoping when you get your USGS peer review study that they'll dive into that, because there are other factors, as you just described, other than precipitation that are driving this. And this was one really good example.
Yeah, and I'd just say that, you've got a limited time series. It would look way different if, we had been collecting data for 200 years, right? And so this piece at the end looks so anomalous, say, in these like 4 cycles that you're showing, but actually, if you look back at the cycle that's between like 1970 and 1980, right? That actually bears some similarity to what was happening towards the end of the time series. So I think that our, interpretation of what we see visually is really, affected by this short, but it really is a short length of record, even though we think it's long because it's so hard to get these numbers, right?
Yep, thank you. Great points. Next slide. This is Yamhill 4640 is just an example of a well with much larger magnitude and rate of declines. In this case, a total decline of over 45 feet and a rate of 0.8 feet per year. This one was best correlated with 2-year moving average precipitation. Next slide. Sherman 340 is a well that really shows a couple of different regimes, and I think this gets to the points that were just brought up, that a water level trend might be composed of one general cycling pattern that you can see from maybe year 2000 on that's correlated with precipitation, as well as sometimes unique events like the drop in the early 90s here that might not be representative of the overall record. And these unique events will tend to actually increase the magnitude and rate evaluated under this analysis. Though I don't want to suggest that all of the large measurements that we see are outliers, because of the previous example for was a reasonably consistent cycling pattern. Let's look at the next slide. So if we apply this same test to the entire set of 234 wells, we can look at the distributions of the results statewide. The next slide shows the cumulative distribution of the maximum total water level decline among the well clusters on the x-axis. So on the y-axis, and the blue line, it's sort of blue, is the percent of those clusters with maximum decline less than x. So it goes from a minimum of about 2 feet of fluctuation to a maximum of 40 feet that accounts for 100% of those well clusters. The dashed black line guides your eye from the 90th percentile, showing that about 90% of well clusters had maximum declines, tracing down to the x-axis of less than 24 feet. This 90th percentile is being proposed as a compromise between objectives for the proposed definition. That is, it allows water levels to remain consistently stable for the vast majority of wells included in this analysis, while retaining sensitivity to limit the impacts of additional declines on existing users, like allowing wells to go dry.
Before you move on, Zach has his hand up.
Yeah, I hear Annette's voice getting more and more tired every time she says that. Sorry, Annette. Ben, I just wanted to clarify on the percentiles here. This is the percentile, the 90th percentile of the 106 clusters, right? And these clusters were selected because they are correlated with precipitation. But when we think about the 9,397 wells with water level data across the state, 90th percentile of these 106 clusters that are already sensitive to precipitation is probably the 99th percentile of all wells with groundwater level trends. Is that right?
It might be higher. I'm not sure that I would give it the 99th percentile. The wells included in this analysis are expected to be a reasonable sample of the variability that we see that's consistent with being reasonably stable. It's certainly possible and would be an interesting further study to look at the variability among all wells. But I don't want to try to hazard a guess as to how applicable this would be to those wells.
Well, that's fine. No need to think about that. Scrap the 99th percentile thing from the record. But the point is these wells that you selected for this analysis, which is reasonable, I support that selection, but these are the wells that are most correlated with precipitation. So the other 9,000 and change wells are less likely correlated with precipitation or don't have the right data for this analysis. And so when we talk about 90th percentile of the precipitation correlated wells, the other wells we can infer are mostly not as sensitive to these responses and therefore will oscillate less frequently, right?
Maybe, or just have different trends entirely, like consistent declines, who knows what.
Tammy, did you have a
Yeah,
question?
again, just point of clarification as far as the process. So, the definition of maximum decline, so you got one well, you went through each year, you did the 5, 10, 20 thing, you took the minimum at each year, and then the maximum of those. I really was trying to get it from your write-up, but I was unclear.
The distinction here is between the test for total declines, like from any year to any following year, versus the rate test. Right now, we're only talking about total declines, which any water level can look at any previous annual high water level. No restriction on 5 to 20 years for the total declines.
Yeah, but as far as the rate, I'm sorry, the max, okay, yeah, gotcha. It's the next.
The rate part's coming next, only maximum declines shown here. Let's see, the next slide shows a map of those same cluster specific results statewide, along with outlines of administrative basins. Consistent with that last slide, the vast majority of these dots are colored. Ooh, it's real hard to see. I'm sorry about the color scale.
That whole light, I'm not sure how to do it.
The vast majority are colored green and blue. You can see it in the handout in the memo that was shared earlier this week. There are a handful of wells with maximum values exceeding 25 feet in yellow and red. Some administrative basins have more clusters than others, but they all show a strong majority of those clusters with total declines, maximum declines less than 25 feet, and only up to 2 clusters per basin exceeding that value. So this general consistency supports the department's proposed workflow of continuing to develop a statewide definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels, and then allow for later refinement of those thresholds through basin program rules. The last slide considers a different perspective on the impact of the total decline threshold. The previous graph and map talked about the percent of well clusters that would pass the total decline tests over their entire period of record. This curve instead shows the percent of that period of record that they would, during which they would continue to pass the test. So they show the same general curve, but they have higher values because even wells that exceed a total decline value during 1 year still tend to have smaller declines during most of the other years. So the blue upper line, the smoother curve, shows the mean percentage of time among all the well clusters. The lower orange line shows the percent of time among the well clusters that exceeded the limit at some point. The dashed black line indicates those percentages of time associated with a threshold of, for example, 25 feet, which leads you to seeing that water levels would remain stable by this total decline test 99% of the time among all well clusters. And even among the clusters that would fail at some point, the test would have them remain stable 86% of the time over their period of record.
Adam.
You said something very quickly about, and then we'll refine these through basin program rules. Can you back up and say what you just said again more slowly about that topic?
The consistency of the results statewide support the department's development of statewide definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels. We leave the option for further refinement of those thresholds through basin program rules, and that's written into the proposed definition.
I'll make sure I heard that.
Thanks. Next slide. Now we apply the same approach to the rate test. This is getting to your comment. And next slide looks at going back to percentage of clusters that pass the rate test over their eligible period of record on the y-axis. In this case, the 90th percentile, that dashed line, corresponds to a rate of 0.64 feet per year. We can compare this rate test against a standard statistical test for trends in time, which is the Mann-Kendall test. Given the same data, the standard test finds a much smaller portion of those well clusters, 35%, that remain entirely stable over their entire record. This means that this standard test is more sensitive to declines and less able to indicate wells as remaining reasonably stable despite these precipitation correlated cycles captured in this analysis. At least that's the case for any threshold above 0.2 feet per year. It reflects the fact that the proposed test balances the objectives set out for the definition of reasonably stable, considering the benefits of consistency as well as sensitivity. The practical impact is that the proposed rate test with thresholds, in the range of 0.5 to 0.7 feet per year would evaluate stability more in favor of potential applicants than in favor of protecting existing users compared with the standard statistical test.
Sorry, can you repeat that? That last sentence.
The fact that the proposed rate test, the blue line, is higher than the dashed horizontal line from the Mann-Kendall test means that the proposed rate test would more often find water levels to be reasonably stable so that water would be available compared with if we used a standard statistical test for the rate test.
Yeah, thank you. You made a comment I was gonna make. But the comment is, I mean, I think it's important for people to realize that you've actually, made this favor applicants.
Sarah?
My question is, where does the Water Resources Department use this Mann-Kendall test currently?
We're not currently using it. It's more of a standard approach that's used by the U.S. Geological Survey as well as academic researchers.
And I believe it came up in prior RAC discussion. And I'm also just going to acknowledge that we spent time internally talking about this presentation, recognizing that we have a variety of backgrounds on the RAC. And for those people who do have a scientific background and want to dig into the statistics with Ben, I will just offer, we're happy to set up a specific meeting for that purpose. So don't feel like this is the one and only time that you can learn about this.
I think my question wasn't about the statistics of the Mann-Kendall test, but rather just
Yep.
trying to understand why that's even up here if that's not what the department's doing. So I guess maybe this isn't a future slide, I don't know, but it would be more helpful to know compared to what we're doing now, what the proposed rules do rather than a test the department doesn't even use.
Appreciate that comment, Sarah.
So, yeah, I wanna, first, I'll repeat what Annette said, which is, it's up here because it's a comment we received that we wanted to acknowledge and compare to. And reasonably stable water levels is not defined now, so we can't compare this to something now because now we have a subjective test. The hydrogeologist looks at the existing water level trends in the vicinity of an application and makes a professional judgment. And there was a discussion in an earlier RAC, maybe the first or second RAC, about, hey, we'd like to have a quantitative breakpoint by which everybody can understand and do their own analysis and say yay or nay, this is reasonably stable or not. So the whole purpose of this, I want to emphasize, is to define and make functional a statutory policy of reasonably stable water levels shall be determined and maintained, and B, meet all the objectives that, as well as possible, these competing objectives that Ben showed in the first or second slide. And one of those is that there is a quantitative metric that can be written into rule, and we move away from our current process of our hydrogeologists assessing data and making a call.
Thank you. Let's move to the next slide. As with the total decline test, we can also consider the impact of a given potential threshold on maximum allowed rates on the percent of a period of record that wells would remain reasonably stable. Again, here, the blue upper smooth curve is all well clusters, and the lower orange curve is among well clusters that fail the rate test at a given maximum allowed value on the x-axis. And the vertical dash line indicates a hypothetical threshold of 0.7 feet per year. And at that threshold, that would leave all well clusters reasonably stable for 97% of the time. And even among those that would fail at some point, they still remain wouldn't be below that threshold 90% of the time. So to summarize all of this in the next slide, the criteria for inclusion in this analysis identified 234 wells that roughly represent the dynamically stable range. The flexibility to correlate with precipitation records over any of a range of time periods accounted for important hydrogeologic variability across the state and substantially increased the sample size compared with earlier versions of this analysis. The analysis tested the total decline magnitude as well as the rate of decline over each of those wells. Results showed that the total declines do not show significant variability between basins, supporting the department's current statewide approach for rulemaking. The thresholds for the total decline and rate of decline are currently left as unspecified, but could be set by considering a 90th percentile of well clusters that remain stable according to each of these tests over their period of record for a particular threshold. They would leave thresholds of about 25 feet and about 0.6 to 0.7 feet per year. Given those thresholds, water levels are expected to remain stable among this representative set of wells between 97 and 99% of the time. And at those thresholds, the proposed rate test remains stable for the data set significantly more than a standard statistical test, reflecting the balance of objectives between consistency and sensitivity. We've submitted this draft memo, both that you received on Monday. We submitted it for peer review by the U.S. Geological Survey and hope to close that loop in a substantial way before the next RAC meeting. But in the meantime, we welcome your feedback.
Tammy and then Adam?
The question again, so if I understand right, the idea is that as part of the peer review process, you are gonna be trying to define, on the cumulative plots, those dashed lines, right? Define which one of those to pick to fill in your XXs in the rules, is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Though I might clarify that the USGS isn't, I think, planning to advise us on what an appropriate
Right, 'cause they don't
percentile
do
is.
that kind of thing.
Evaluating methodology.
Right, yeah, I understand, but so somebody's gonna be picking that dash line and filling in the X's in the, yeah, so the rules would include a real number.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Adam?
Yeah, Ben and others, Coco works with some hydrogeologists that are really familiar with the Deschutes Basin, and of course, we just got this 25-page technical analysis 2 days before the RAC meeting, so we haven't had a lot of time to digest it, but we will have some comments that, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, how do we get these technical comments to you in a way that might be part of the peer review process? In other words, like, for example, a hydrogeologist that looked at this really quickly said, well, it has a lot to do with the data associated with the hydrographs, and maybe there's assumptions here that are mischaracterizing what is influencing the hydrograph, for example, like the Deschutes well that we talked about. So we just want to make sure that we get, I would say, I don't know what percentage of people on this RAC, number one, understand the memo, probably some, and number two, that could provide you any substantive feedback that would be helpful. So, since we're in RAC meeting number 7, and now you've laid bare your technical analysis, it seems like maybe we should have done that at the front end and then talked about the policy that follows that. We just want to make sure that if we are to provide some technical comments, that those are somehow, part of this peer review study. And I really do, I came here to say we should get this peer reviewed, so thank you for heading that off.
Thank you, and I would welcome your comments, and those of other hydrogeologists. I would say sooner is better, so that we can implement them in a way that influences the final result. And just to your point about the different potential influences, like mechanistic causes for these fluctuations, as I mentioned earlier, this analysis is kind of agnostic to the cause. All it asks about is, are these fluctuations correlated with precipitation, and are they stable over the long run? It doesn't say that they need to be purely natural. It's okay if some of these fluctuations are influenced by anthropogenic activities. But I would still welcome further feedback on that point and the applicability of different wells.
Zach?
I guess one quick clarifying question, one comment. Clarifying question directly in response to Ben, what you were just saying about the agnostic analysis. Isn't it true for stationary hydrographs that they can be divided into 3 components, the trend, the seasonality, and the stochasticity? And you've removed the trend, so we're really looking at the combination of seasonality and stochasticity?
Yes, I would agree. I would just slightly rephrase it, not as seasonality, but as decadal.
What the hell's the last one?
Stochasticity.
Yeah, I can't even say it, let alone define it. What does it mean? It's a serious question.
Random fluctuations on top of seasonal impacts, things caused by, among other things, measurement error.
Okay.
Crazy data.
Crazy data.
There you go.
Thanks, Zach.
Okay.
Make me feel stupid.
Ben, can you just talk a little bit more about the peer review process? Are you gonna have a meeting and they're gonna say, yeah, that looks good? Are they gonna write a technical memo that we could all read? What does it look like?
We're expecting to get written comments back from the USGS. I don't think we've decided exactly the format of how that will be shared, but we will certainly be sharing the updated version of the memo.
And we're happy to share their comments as well.
I never got to the comment portion of what I was going to say, which is that, Ben, I really do appreciate this analysis. It is very rigorous. It's clear that, when we talk about creating science-based rules, this is using the data available to us, and it's leveraging that to make informed decisions. I appreciate that the analysis didn't find consistent variation across or systematic variations across basins. That provides more a more rigorous kind of fundamental assumption that there's no need for basin by basin breakdowns of the statewide rulemaking. I guess my read on this is that this provides good justification for the thresholds that we already selected and talked about as a committee. And I'm not sure that we need to change those thresholds to go to an arbitrary 90% cluster threshold, because really what your analysis shows is that for the 0.5 feet rate of decline in climate sensitive wells, more than 85% of the precipitation correlated clusters, which again are probably the most sensitive clusters to climate variations, still stayed reasonably stable. So that provides good justification for the 0.5 feet rate of decline that we already had and have discussed as a RAC. And similarly, for the 25 feet total decline, well over 90% of the, again, most sensitive, climate sensitive wells naturally met that threshold. That provides additional good justification for what this committee has already talked about for many, many meetings in a row. So I'll just leave that there. I'm not sure that we need to change what's there so much as use this as justification for what the committee has already discussed.
Thank you for that comment, Zach. Okay, let's move on. April.
A couple thoughts. One, I think, just reflecting on what Zach said, I will say for myself as a RAC member, I don't recall being asked specifically to agree or not agree with any of the components of the rule. So I'll just be clear that I do intend to provide comments on these rules. My hope is that we will be revising the rules from what was supposed to go out for public comment in the fall to have a more balanced approach, but I'm also preparing if that doesn't occur and know that I'm going to have to more than likely pay hydrogeologists to review all this. I very much support having the peer review, and I'm glad that you guys are going to do that. I want to echo Adam's comments. Just, as a reminder, we weren't even supposed to be having this meeting or the next meeting, and I found this information to be really helpful, but I do agree that this should have been something that came much earlier in the process, and reiterating things we've already said in other forums. This RAC was started during the legislative session. More than half of the people that are on here are policy folks. And so I think, again, as it's stated, most of us are not hydrogeologists, and that makes it difficult to weigh in on very technical data and even understand, as Jeff pointed out, what the folks are saying. But we'll work through all that. I am, however, while I'm not a hydrogeologist, I am familiar with quantitative research as well as qualitative research. And one of the questions that among many that's come up with this is if we go back to the map that you guys had in here about the total declines and the spatial distribution. I think I know the answer to this, but just looking for some affirmation or correction if that's not the case. The areas where there is the most significant decline as determined by this analysis that Ben did, and thank you, Ben, I think the presentation was good in explaining what you did, but those areas where particularly we have the red, orange dots, those do correspond with where there are already critical groundwater areas or limited groundwater areas. Or what I'm saying is, I think, we could overlay a variety of maps here, but I think it would be helpful to have kind of that understanding of where we already have determined, or you guys have determined that an area is limited or critical in its groundwater. Because I think that's an important aspect that we don't seem to be really discussing as part of these rule changes, is that there's already in those areas the ability to have a moratorium on new groundwater or restrict existing uses depending on what the determination is. I'm making an overgeneralization there, but was there anything, I guess, maybe in this total decline spatial distribution map where there were significant declines in areas where there isn't already a critical groundwater area or a groundwater limited area or something along those lines? Does that align with the map that you guys already have that shows that, if that makes sense?
It does, and I haven't done that specific analysis, but just glancing at this, I'm reasonably confident that there are at least a couple of the well clusters whose total declines exceed 25 feet that are outside of existing administrative areas.
So the reason why I asked that is multiple. One is that, I don't like us, to be kind of making it as the sky is falling on the one hand and everywhere has a problem, but also recognizing that we do have areas of the state that we do know are problematic, and there's already a recognition of that. But it's also that, being one of a few folks who regularly sit in on all commission meetings in the past, it's been a few years, but I'm sure, Ivan, you probably recall, there have been communities that have come forward to actually ask for their area to be listed as one of those categories. And it's kind of there's a lot of data that has to be provided before an area can be classified as being, for example, a critical groundwater area or groundwater limited. And I'm not arguing with that, but I think, that's also important for folks, particularly those that aren't on this RAC, to know in relation to that, what a significant departure from standard practice, what's being proposed is, because I think that, all of a sudden from it being, you have to show that there's significant declines before we're gonna put limitations on this particular area of the state. It's gonna be, nope, we're gonna basically make this blanket assumption that there's declines and you guys are gonna have to prove there isn't a decline if you want to develop a well. And, I think, again, I'm not trying to say that there's not a problem or that we don't need to do something differently from what we're currently doing as a state, but this is more of an extreme pendulum that doesn't seem to balance between the need to protect existing uses while allowing for sustainable development and people being able to continue to live and work and operate. So I think it would be helpful in some future meetings, or maybe it will come up as part of the peer review, to have an overlay with some of these maps that with data that you guys already have that more kind of clearly shows that. And again, the other part of it is earlier comments I made, being able to focus on the areas where we know we have problems and figuring out what we need to do to improve that situation, rather than, again, have a blanket approach that may not be appropriate for certain basins. And then my one question, as we're getting into the rules here for the reasonably stable groundwater areas, well, one, I want to flag that I'm concerned that these adjustments here have taken out the specific number of feet per year in both A and B on my page 38, but I think there's a difference in the paging numbers up here. But how are we going to be determining what that number is going to be? Because I can't envision that you guys are going to put out rules that have XX in there instead of a specific fee. And is that something you're looking for us to provide comments on? And then my last question there before we go further is, on the subsequent page 9, reasonably stable groundwater levels, under 9C, where it says, if groundwater has not yet been extracted or authorized for extraction from the groundwater reservoir, then water levels may be presumed reasonably stable. And I know we've talked about that in the past, and kind of thinking about, some area out in the middle of nowhere, and I won't call them out, that could be clearly said, well, there isn't anything else out here, so yes, you'll be able to drill a well because there isn't anything. But does that sentence include or exclude exempt wells?
So I want to answer one of your questions, and then I also want to note, Bill, that I see your hand. So we will be filling in the numbers. And that will be done once we hear feedback from this group and from the USGS peer review. So that we will definitely not be sending anything out for public comment that doesn't have numbers in it. And then Justin, do you want to answer the second question?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Exempt wells.
Oh, exempt wells. So does that include exempt wells? I think.
So exempt wells don't currently require a permit. So this analysis does not apply to exempt wells.
Right. And I guess the question is, if there's exempt well development in an area, does that mean that there needs to be data to show water levels are reasonably stable? I think mostly yes, though we'll take into account density and size of the aquifer, and like, we'll take into account the site-specific information. So, I don't
With
know.
regard to no development.
With regard to the no
I'm tracking
development
now. Okay.
comment, yeah, so we haven't said, I mean, it's a function of density of exempt wells and a function of the aquifer system and what its recharge is and what have you, right? So in jumping ahead to, should we make it quantified? I mean, I'm sure we could figure out something, but I think that it's better. This isn't going to be this is an uncommon example, at least that we've seen in the historic set of applications, but we want to leave space for it.
So I want to get to Bill's hand, and then we really need to move on so that we can have our public comment at 11:30 times certain, and we have one more agenda item between now and then. And so again, if people want to get into the details of the analysis, happy to schedule some time for those folks with Ben outside of the RAC. Bill.
Yeah, thanks. Ben, this seems like a really interesting, carefully developed methodology that seems to address some of the questions that were raised in the early RAC meetings about wanting to, have some statistics behind the sort of the probabilities. And I have looked at, but haven't read carefully through your analysis, but I plan to do that, and I might want to have a conversation just to make sure I understand it fully. But I think the spirit of this is, look, we have all kinds of fluctuations in groundwater levels, some due to oscillations and precipitation. How do we distinguish between something that's a decline because of drawdown versus something that's just an oscillation? Take all the data that we can in the state, do statistical analyses that allows us to separate, type 1 errors from type 2 errors and have a good sense of when we're not mistaking a multi-year fluctuation from something that is in actual decline. And I look forward to hearing what USGS says about it, but I'm impressed by it. Thanks.
Thank you, and I welcome your feedback.
So Tammy, a quick comment?
Yeah, it's a quick comment, because you said you want information, you want input as far as filling in the X's, and I'm just gonna give you a preview of what I think I'm gonna say, which is that I think that the 90% is too high. Because, and what you've shown, both with your cumulative plots and with the maps, is that you're then capturing outliers, essentially. And, I think in terms of trying to make this balance, right, between making sure that you properly capture what would be considered, this sort of, normal fluctuations versus distinguishing long-term declines or whatever, you've perhaps gone too far with the 90%. So I'm just gonna leave it at that and.
Okay, and I am gonna request RAC members who would like to schedule some time with Ben to talk about more of the details of this analysis, to please identify themselves to Laura, and then we will work with support staff to find some time to schedule that between now and our next RAC meeting. So we will offer that as an opportunity. Let's move now to the language changes for reasonably stable.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and move us through this relatively quick, but also address comments. So we've already had discussion about, yes, we are going to fill in these X and Y values with the assessment of our back-looking evaluation of existing trends that are reasonably stable, meaning that they're recovering back into the dynamically stable range over appropriate climate cycle periods. And we'll continue to think about this pre-development term and looking for input from others on, if not highest known and not pre-development, what's a suggested better term. So
Before you do that, Jessica,
Yep.
can I ask that you select that text and maybe make it all red? Because I don't think they can see any of the grayed out stuff. The people in the room.
Okay.
I don't know if you can do that easily. If that's too much.
Well, everybody's got a copy of it.
I know.
Hard copy, so, and I'm concerned about time.
I get
So-
that.
Okay.
Well, here, I'll just.
Okay, there we
I'll
go.
share from here, yeah.
But now we don't know. Is that right?
I think
Okay.
that's right, yep. Okay, so. Also, I want to point out on the very bottom here, that we have also proposed, or we've removed between RAC 6 and RAC 7, this 8% value. So again, that wasn't part of the analysis that Ben presented. We wanted to hold it to the, again, our qualitative, science base, but we wanted to have a backlooking that explained everything, and we haven't done any analysis around that, so we believe that it's appropriately protective, even after striking this term. So wanted to acknowledge that we've done that. I'm gonna need a different set of clicks here. Okay,
No changes there.
no changes to reasonably stable groundwater levels in that section. And then the request is to make this all red. So two things we've done here. This 9D is where we say that the definition can be superseded by alternate definitions and basin program rules. And linked to that is a new set of language in 9E. Definition does not apply to critical area designations. So I'm gonna start at the bottom and go backwards. So critical area designations are existing Butter Creek and Stage Gulch critical areas actually define reasonably stable water levels for those critical areas. And it's a different standard than we've proposed here for this statewide standard. We wanted to acknowledge that that's the case, and that future critical area designations might come up with something that they want to call reasonably stable as a target. Now, we aren't going to get to a critical area before water levels have dropped more than 50 feet likely. And so we're not going to have a critical area that's reasonably stable, right? But they might still want to talk about going from a declining trend to a stabilized trend. So we just want to acknowledge that's just kind of a special subset of basin program rules can override. And we already have two existing conditions where that's the case. With respect to 9D, we've similarly removed the requirement that a basin-specific rule can be no less stringent than the definitions of excessively declining or declined excessively. Again, that's based on feedback we've received here and in other venues that allows the commission to be the final arbiter through a basin program rulemaking of what's appropriate or not. It allows place-based planning groups or what have you to come up with a proposed novel solution to propose to the commission to address these criteria. So that is the reason for proposing to strike that. So the basin rule program is still, we believe, the correct venue in which to supersede a statewide rule. So. Okay.
I have a.
Zach and then Lisa.
Okay, Zach.
Justin, I would just push back on that a little bit. I don't think there's any scenario where a reasonable person could say that something that's excessively declining is reasonably stable. If it's excessively declining, it's not reasonably stable, right? So what 9D used to do is put sideboards around what could be determined reasonably stable by saying that as long as you don't actually excessively decline, then you could change what reasonably stable looks like on a basin by basin scale. Just from an intuitive perspective and from trying to interpret these rules and these laws, I don't see a scenario where the department would want to be saying that, yes, this groundwater level is excessively declining and it's reasonably stable.
Lisa and then Kate.
Yeah, I guess along those lines, I think I don't support this. I think we're spending a lot of time and effort to come up with statewide standards that implement the statute and are consistent with science, and we're peer reviewing this analysis. And to just have this in here with no sideboards, just being counterproductive to me. I think at an absolute minimum, if you were gonna have this in here, we need sideboards. I mean, maybe, you know, we need something rigorous. And just throwing this in here by itself, I think is going to result in a huge amount of time spent. It's not productive, so.
Kate, and then Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, we're in the maybe unique position of supporting the statewide stewardship of groundwater, but also seeing some basin specific context. And so I guess I would have a similar comment that we appreciate this, but would also love to see what the state can do as far as supporting a process and what kind of science would come to bear on that process and how we would have the resources to go through a basin program rules process that might not be necessary to go into the rules, but for something for the state to be clear about moving forward if we were to embark upon this path. Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment in support of these on for COGR, the changes. I think removing the sideboards provides the flexibility that you're really seeking with the spirit of a basin specific rule. So to put a bunch of people in a room to have them work on a basin specific rule, only to limit what they can come up with, I think is I guess conflicts with the spirit of what we're trying to offer here with point D and a more simplified version. I would echo Kate's points earlier. There's a lot of resources that would be needed from OWRD and others to really help facilitate these processes. This is a basin specific planning effort is a large undertaking and it requires a lot of people, a lot of facilitation. It's not a small endeavor. So in the future, there's got to be additional funding or budgetary asks of the department to be able to help and support place-based planning rulemaking.
Sarah.
Thanks. I just really wanted to comment so that all the feedback you weren't getting totally skewed in one direction. I think this is a step in the right direction, in that being that different groundwater basins are different and they should be treated differently. And that one of my main concerns is that we're putting these blanket rules on everything where they may not be appropriate. And so I guess I just wanted to say even one step further, I think it would be even better if we were doing these rules at a basin by basin level, even if it costs more, because then they would be more accurate to the conditions in each basin, rather than starting with the statewide rule and then putting that pressure on basins to have to act quickly to reverse them if it doesn't work there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So I want people who would like to participate by offering public comment at 11:30 to identify themselves in the chat. And or if you're in the room and want to make public comment, please let me know. We are going to power through with our final agenda item between now and 11:30, and then we'll get to the RAC roundtable after public comment.
Okay, so this segment is really tied to Sarah's comment that she just made. Is a great segue. Statewide rules versus basin specific rules. We've heard from some RAC members that desire basin specific rules. Again, as Sarah just commented, April has talked in the past about waiting for House Bill 2018. Really want to address that to remind folks what's going to come out of 2018 and to tie in what we've done and why, like, punchline is, we really believe that these basin program or these proposed rules are appropriate to apply statewide. I don't believe that they go too far, and I'll tag Tammy's comment of, you know, hey, maybe 90% is too much to take into account. We're taking that into account to ensure that the rules we put in place are appropriate across the whole state. And while basin program rules might be more appropriate it's not because reasonably stable ranges are significantly in excess of what we've described. So what we've described is a reasonably stable water level that is appropriate statewide from the perspective of a minimum standard. And I can point to, for example, the Fort Rock limited area, which was established in the 80s. You know, Fort Rock water levels would pass this test for reasonably stable, but obviously that's not the case. And we decided that decades ago. And because we put different basin program rules into place, that area has a much longer period of time of operating as they did at the time the rules went in place in the 80s than if we would have just allowed for further and further and further development, and we'd have something similar to the Army likely. So real quick, what are we going to get out of House Bill 2018? First of all, House Bill 2018, among other things, asked us to, contract with the USGS to develop groundwater budgets for every significant basin or every administrative basin in the state. That project is underway, and the GS has contracted that out or put in the scope of the phase to be delivered in 2 phases. Phase 1 is expected in 2026, and the main deliverables include an initial report of base flow estimations. So we're talking about hydraulic connection, and we've talked about should there be more information, what have you. This is going to be a more information that further quantifies the amount of base flow basin by basin. And that's going to help us with our communication, but it's not going to functionally add to a hydraulic connection finding or not. So we're also collecting specific conductance data throughout the state. There was a previous comment on how that's used, and we gave an explanation of groundwater has different qualities than surface water, and so that allows us to improve the base flow separation techniques to have a better, more precise understanding of the percentage of flow at any given time during the year that is due to groundwater, and that will be incorporated into phase 2. And then lastly, the phase 1 deliverable is going to give a comparison of the national hydraulic model that the USGS has with Oregon gauge data that wasn't used to calibrate that national model, to get an idea of how well that national model describes Oregon conditions. And then they're going to take that and go into phase 2. They're going to clip that national model down to an Oregon specific model. They're going to do further calibrations based on that Oregon data, plus the specific conductance data that we're taking into account. And in the end, we're going to have a more robust model-based display of groundwater budgets throughout the state. The report's going to sum it up by drainage basin, but the model itself will be able to give estimates at finer timescales and finer spatial scales. That being said, it's still going to be data that's averaged over an area and averaged over some time period. And the finer you constrain that, the less confidence that the model is providing a reasonable estimation of that on the ground point of application conditions. And so even though we'll be refining that from the perspective of how we use that to assess allocation or groundwater availability for future allocation, we believe that the rule changes we're proposing here are really the most appropriate for making site-specific findings. So what those, just again, to review our proposed rules, they're based on statute and science. They have these 2 major components we've heard about today. We're defining the reasonably stable groundwater levels against a site-specific data. Okay, so again, that dynamically stable range, that blue bar, and we're avoiding new groundwater rights that impact already over-appropriated surface water. And again, we're basing that on an application-specific evaluation of hydraulic connection, then PSI, then substantial interference. for a site-by-site basis. With respect to the reasonably stable groundwater levels, again, we're proposing that we describe 90% of wells that we've looked back at our current records and show that they're responding to climate over a good long record period. So 100% of the time, 90% of the wells will be described by this. And as Ben pointed out in his presentation, even for those wells that sometimes fall outside of these rule values, they still only do so for a portion of their record. So, temporarily looking at any given hydrograph that responds to climate, 97 to 99% of the time, these rules are going to apply. And when we look at the distribution of the maximum total declines across the state, they aren't clustered in any particular area, right? Like these few clusters that are more than 25 feet that are falling, on the very far end of the tail there, they're located throughout various basins. And that means that for these basins, we still have this wide range, right? And it's not like one basin is described by a wider range. Some of them are described by smaller ranges. But for the most part, this proposed rule is applicable to cover most of the state, most of the time, in a way that we feel is appropriate. So there might still be reason for basin-specific rules. We're open to that, but that's not a reason not to have this baseline statewide specific rule. And we believe that the statewide rule is very appropriately defined for the whole state. We've heard about data availability. We have many wells across the state with enough data to make a specific finding. There are gaps in here. Those are generally in areas where there's not a lot of demand, right? We're monitoring where the biggest human demand is for the resource. So for the most part, we've got data in many parts of the state, and where we don't, at a minimum, we have a precisely defined minimum amount of data needed to take or to make a decision. So we feel like the data that we have is appropriate for use with the proposed rules. And then getting on to finally hydraulic connection and PSI, we heard and talked about earlier. Hydraulic connection, it will operate as it does today. And in our discussion, I hope it was clear that when questions were asked, we went to the site-specific data, right? The answer is we look at the specific location where we're evaluating an application. So it is very site-specific and application-specific. The difference is certainly in PSI. This is the point Adam brought up. There is a significant change in the rules for potential for substantial interference. It removes the allowance for what we do now, which is allowing long-term cumulative impact. So as Greg pointed out, if you were further than a quarter mile and within a mile, you could apply for a rate up to 1% of the natural stream flow or 1% of the in-stream water right. And there's nothing to stop 100 applications from adding up. And so that is what we are changing to, again, be more in line with the rule of prior appropriation, right? If there's not water available, then we shouldn't be nicking more at it, even if that is going to build over more than a year, or, it'll take time to build up. There's no question, again, as Travis pointed out, with enough time, the impact's going to be 100% of the property. So that was very fast, but
Okay. I think the take-home message really is that the information that we are getting from the House Bill 2018 studies is not going to impact the establishment of reasonably stable water levels or the evaluation of hydraulic connection. It will help us in other ways, but it is not going to help us in making site-specific analyses. So I have two people who have signed up for public comment. I'm gonna go to Chris Hall first. Chris Hall has a graphic that he would like to share. I'm not sure what the best way for us to do that is, and I'm gonna ask people to please limit their comments to 3 minutes so that we can get to the RAC roundtable before we adjourn.
And so, can you go in the chat and see if you can share the figure that Chris has?
You can click on it and then. Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me? My name is Christopher Hall, Executive Director of Water League.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. So this is your graph, the Water Resources Department's graph. It shows the percent of water wells by type. There's a little over 250,000, 3% of which of the water use is domestic wells. And then the next bar over is the number of wells the irrigation community uses, which is 7%, but the total percent of water use is much higher. And in fact, this is water use across the whole state, surface water, groundwater. Anyway, what I would like to first point out is that applying equity justice values to defend the largest water users whose commercial uses are responsible for dewatering streams, drying up domestic wells, draining aquifers, and posing serious threats to municipalities, it's cynical and it's equity washing the overpumpers, and I don't believe it will stand in the long run. Equity justice refers to those who lack equitable factors and experience true inequity. To use equity for those who have most water and have the most political control over water use is unconscionable. Now, I think it's important on a separate note to address this issue of statewide planning goals and having the need for local place-based planning. I think that one of the strongest, most underutilized tools that the Water Resources Department has and the Water Resource Commission is the basin planning. And I think since 1955, basin planning has been stymied by lobbying, it's been stymied by ineptitude and a lack of funding. And I believe it's one of the most important ways we can address the concerns that need to bring people together, such as local place-based planning with an overarching statewide planning set of criteria. In the same way that purportedly education across the state would have similar statewide planning goals, and that individual communities would then teach their own children, however they do. And simply in the same way that the Department of Land Conservation and Development has statewide planning goals to guide equal application of development standards across the state and in different regions, these local towns and communities and counties comply by using their comprehensive plans. And this is a way to address the needs for place-based water use planning in statewide standards. And I think that this is a model that the state should consider. I think that folks who are concerned about making sure their local regions are equitably treated is justified. However, there must be statewide standards that everybody is held to. And lastly, I just want to point out that exempt wells are limited to 1/2 acre of non-commercial lawn and garden. They cannot be cobbled together to be used for commercial use ever. Exempt wells, as that graph shows, use 3% of all diverted water, and their use is negligible. Dragging exempt domestic wells into the limitation of commercial water uses is just not justified. As it shows, agriculture uses over 85% of all diverted water for both surface and aquifer, and that is almost 25 times that of exempt wells. Lastly, we all know that cities and municipalities use a very small amount of water, and the elephant in the room is ignoring the difference between the domestic and the municipal uses compared to irrigation uses. When we talk about significant issues and problems with regard to groundwater allocation and critical groundwater areas and groundwater declines, we're faced with having to admit that it's the irrigation that is the vast majority of water use. And so I'm on the side, and Water League is on the side of the cities and the domestic water users who just use a drop in the bucket. They should not suffer for future groundwater allocation. So for instance, the city of Bend should have a chance to expand its residential population and should be able to meet the governor's requirements statewide for 36,000 new housing units and not hold municipalities hostage for the water use that alfalfa, hay products, and other forage crops use in regions that are groundwater restricted. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you. Glenn Barrett?
Yeah, I'm Glenn Barrett, from Lunch Valley down by Klamath Falls, the eastern Oregon or eastern Klamath Falls area. And I still have concern with these rules going beyond, there's consequences that are gonna happen with these rules. And based on that, I really like the idea of having a report done on how many wells this would have affected in the last 5, 10, 15 years. So we can see the magnitude of the rule changes that might have and the economic impact of not having those wells. And I'm wondering if it would be, or I would suggest, having written in the rules that 10 years from now, in the future, you have an estimate and a report on how these rules change future applications and the economic impact of those. So we can go back and see in 10 years from now, how did these rules really affect what we're doing? I also believe we have tools in a toolbox that we have not utilized instead of changing all these rules, and wonder how many water management problem areas the department has come up with. And with the magnitude, with that idea and the magnitude that we're changing, can we do a test pilot area basin instead of doing a statewide and rulemaking to see how these work? And your Ben's memo, I was wondering, are you waiting for USGS response before you make that public?
It's on the website.
Okay, 'cause I just went on the website and it said coming soon for this meeting, so maybe it's in a different spot.
Yeah, no, our web guy, he's been sick most of the week, so, I think there's two, I think the presentation and the memo.
Okay, so
I need to post, I can email it to you.
No,
There's also copies.
I have a copy, I'm just wanting to know.
It will be posted as soon
Okay.
as, he's back.
Thank you for allowing me.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else. David Fields, please. David, thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is David Pills. I'm here to deliver some comments for a client today, actually. The client is the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. First thing I want to say is thank you all for all the hard work you're doing. You are wrestling, and I mean wrestling, with a really challenging, complex technical topic here. And the meetings I've attended, the discussion is awesome. So I really appreciate what you're doing. EDF works through partnerships to link science, economics, law, and environmental justice and build solutions to water resource challenges. And right now, EDF is working across the West to develop and implement water policy and management programs that advance climate resilient, sustainable groundwater governance and management. EDF supports groundwater policies that are protective of the resource, but without sacrificing the economic and general well-being of people and communities that depend on it. Related to this process in particular, EDF is supportive of the concept of protecting aquifers using science-based standards in Oregon. A lot of places in the West are having to go to great lengths to slow groundwater decline, often with huge financial and social costs. This Rules Advisory Committee is an opportunity for Oregon to provide some long-term water security. EDF is really hopeful that this RAC can agree on rules that will prevent future unsustainable groundwater allocations and prevent some of the costly consequences that come with over-allocation. Stabilizing aquifer levels across the state will help ensure water security and prosperity for Oregon's water users, for communities, and also importantly for ecosystems today and also into the future. Thank you for letting me deliver this brief comment. And again, thank you all for your hard work on this.
Thank you, David. Okay, we have just under 20 minutes for RAC roundtable. And Adam, I'd let you and Mike figure out who's gonna do the
Yeah.
roundtable for Cocoa. But Lisa, if we could start with you, please. And I'm gonna alternate between the room and people online. And so Sarah, you're up next.
About like 1 minute, okay.
Or two.
Easier starting with me. Okay, well, I appreciate all the work the department's doing. I think we are sort of at an inflection point here, and I just would urge us to not throw out all the hard work that's been done. I think, you know, when you look at term reasonably stable, I agree with Tammy's comment that, you know, it's really not about how many wells are you capturing in that analysis. It's really about, is the groundwater level reasonably stable, which, you know, arguably would mean declining and then recovering, right? So I think it's just kind of a keep our eye on the ball on that issue. I think in terms of, I know Mr. Hall mentioned housing, and, you know, I did dig into the city of Redmond Water Management Conservation Plan, and I think when you look at the Central Oregon cities, we're really not talking about housing driving that water demand. It's really a lot of outdoor watering. So I think we have a lot of flexibility in terms of meeting additional housing needs there. And I would just hope that we could be a little more creative than just, you know, thinking more groundwater wells. So I guess that's it. I'll leave it. And I do look forward to talking to Ben about the analysis a little bit further.
Okay, great. Sarah, and then we'll go to Coco.
Thank you to everyone for all the time and effort that you are continuing to put into this process. I appreciate the additional emphasis on the science that goes into these rules, but I'm also very mindful of the limitations based on the inputs that we have to date. I think it's very easy for us non-scientists specifically to look at it and say, oh, look, the department covered all the bases, we're good. But it feels like we're only skimming the surface here and talking about big generalities still. But I do really appreciate the department reaching out to the USGS. I'm interested to see what the USGS provides back. And I also look forward to further discussions. I think I heard you say that, you know, we're not moving forward with proposing rules until feedback is received from both the USGS and the RAC. And I hope that you'll take into consideration that it may take RAC members longer than the USGS to consult with their own consultants to provide that feedback, since so many of us are not ourselves scientists. Thank you.
Okay, Mike for Coco, and then Tammy.
Yep, thanks, everybody. Mike Bittner, City of Bend Utilities Director here for Coco. Thanks for letting me pinch hit for Adam. I wanted to just say I appreciate the additional analysis shared today, the 25-pager. I haven't fully gotten into it, but I do appreciate that and being able to dive into it. I think that's one of the reasons Coco has been an advocate to slow this process down just a little bit, was to have some more conversation like we had today. This was pretty good. And it wasn't a planned meeting, which I think was a point made earlier today. So I'd love to have more conversations like this. Coco supports the groundwater rulemaking effort and has from the get-go. We've been involved in this effort for 2 years and have hundreds of hours devoted to this to date. And so we really want to get this right in this rulemaking if possible, but also appreciate the flexibility in the rulemaking that has been delivered to date. So Annette, Justin, your team, really just thank you for hearing us through this process. My concerns moving forward are really the impacts to cities and really the unstudied nature of that work. The impact of the housing goals, I know was just mentioned here just a few minutes ago from another commenter. Let's dive into that and take a close look at it. I think you'd really be surprised if you really owned and operated a water utility here, how much of that seasonal water use is actually tourism water use. It's actually outdoor water use that's beneficial to our economy here. So there's a lot we're doing there to explore. And I think that the department really has a lot more to do to understand how this conflicts with or aligns with the governor's bigger, broader housing goals for Central Oregon. The cost of conservation, I know that was listed as one of the potential solutions for cities moving forward. Conservation is extremely, extremely expensive in terms of a source of water supply. I've been doing this a long time, and I know that our city alone has committed $10 million to conservation over the next 20 years. So this is really where the state needs to dive in deeper and provide an analysis, like Ben provided earlier today, on the cost of conservation for cities to comply with these rules. And lastly, I think there's a curtailment conversation here, Annette and team, for Central Oregon cities. If these rules were adopted today, some cities, some of the fastest Central Oregon cities, will be in a room with their city managers and their mayors talking about a potential curtailment event. I think everybody on this call should understand that. That's how serious these are for some municipalities. We can't just switch gears and go to a different source of supply or start conserving tomorrow. We need some sort of a bridge concept to really give us the certainty we need as cities to plan for the future. We know this regulation's coming. We're here for it. We're ready for it. But give us the chance to really adapt and make sure that we can make the transition. Thank you.
Tammy and then Bill.
Hey, Tammy Wood, and I'm representing the Oregon Lakes Association. So I really appreciate Ben's analysis, and I appreciate his and everyone's patience with, explaining some of the details to me. I'm very much in favor of rules, that the changes that are being made to set these rules based on foundational principles, the science of surface water, groundwater interaction. And I think that by doing that, and in the case of the reasonably stable groundwater levels, basing this on rigorous statistics, I think by doing that, then we can come up with rules that are widely applicable, both across the state and also at these, varying distances from the stream, getting rid of the quarter mile and the mile special whatever. And I do think that by doing that, we can apply these rules across the state. I don't think there's any basin in the state that does not really follow the laws of physics. So I think it works. The one thing I will say, and I'm still considering it, is I think there might be room to actually back off from this 90% when we're setting the thresholds for what would constitute a reasonably stable groundwater level. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Bill, and then April.
Yeah, thanks. I think this process has come a long way since the first meeting, and it's been an interesting process listening to all the comments and seeing what staff has put together and the changes they've made in response to the discussions and the comments. And I'm sort of pleased with where we are and where this has come. And I understand that this is to some degree a narrowly focused set of changes wanting to address one aspect of how groundwater rights permits are given out, and there are other issues that we have, bigger issues that we have talked about, but focus narrowly on sort of what really the agenda is for this process. I think it's doing what it set out to do, and I'm pleased with what I'm hearing.
Thank you. April, and then Casey.
Thank you. So I will endeavor to provide comments before the next RAC meeting, after I can get some technical assistance on some of those more technical details, obviously. I do again appreciate the staff's effort in giving us the information today. And to the extent that there's an opportunity to get a synthesis of some of the conversations that Ben has with more of the technical people, or if it's appropriate for me to get one of the hydrogeologists we work with to meet. But I think for those of us who are from a policy background that are still going to be asked at the end of this to give our opinion and input, and the members we all represent, I think it would be helpful for us all to have a better understanding of some of those more technical aspects of the data, but I think, there's a few things that have been said that I think maybe misinterpret some of the comments that I've made throughout this process, and I won't, address all of those here, but I will say, you know, Annette, I think I heard you earlier and being very clear that this process is not meant to, the proposed rules would not include changes to how we deal with exempt wells. And so I want to make sure that the comments that I made is really about how we're using the information we have and identifying where we don't have the information we need to better make these decisions on, as Justin said, a more site-specific basis. And going back to House Bill 2018, that was a bill that our organization supported, and I think it's one of the rare things, at least in recent history, where you'll find a letter that has both our association as well as Water Watch on it, and that is not a common occurrence, and I think speaks to the vast support that was behind that bill getting passed. I understand that it takes some time, but I just want to highlight that that's a lot of time that's going by before we're going to have some more information for that. But I am mentioning that because I will continue to advocate for additional funding, both for the Water Resources Department to get additional data where we need it and where it would be helpful to make better decisions, but also, as we have in the past, be supportive of additional funding for USGS. I mentioned this more for the other folks in the room and virtually, that there are opportunities for us to advocate as a group for additional federal and state funding, and it would be really helpful to have a chorus of voices that are supporting that, because it shouldn't be something that's controversial. Data is good. However, how we use it is also really important, and I think there'll be additional questions about how we do that. And one of those that I'll raise here, and I'll save the others for later, and you don't have to respond to it now unless you have thoughts, but the data that we're talking about with wells and data is that including folks that are required to measure, but presumably you're getting reports from them. And I mentioned because there was legislation that was in one of the omnibus packages from the last session that gave the authority to the department, which probably should have already had, but we finally got it, to basically give you the authority to request reports from folks who are already measuring. And I think whether it's part of this or outside, I would like to know what the status of that is and whether or not you're starting to ask for that. For those of you who have been a part of those conversations, you're aware of kind of the background. For those of you who aren't, there's a longstanding policy. I believe it's a policy that the Water Resources Department has that hasn't really had any activity about significant points of diversion, SIG pods. And that, of course, has to do with surface water, but I think it's one of those areas where it's been discussed over the 16 years that I've been doing this stuff about how we need to get additional data, but we need to focus that data on where, you know, with the SIG pods program, it was supposed to be where there's both significant diversions and also conflicts, calls for looking at injury and enlargement and that type of stuff. And so again, I want to reiterate the need for additional data and then using that data in a strategic fashion. And then lastly, I'll just say that we have also as an association been very supportive of place-based planning, and a number of our districts and basins have been in precursors to that program, including in the Deschutes and Hood River, and that's definitely something that we would support seeing going forward. But however, we don't want to disincentivize folks who are doing local planning efforts where you have all of us who should be talking about it, which just as a reminder, we are all water users, whether you consider yourself one or not. And I think is the beauty of place-based planning is you have ag, municipal, conservation, recreation, everyone talking and hopefully coming up with solutions together. And that is my hope of where we can go, is coming up with collaborative solutions at a basin level, as opposed to additional litigation that isn't gonna get us anywhere. So thank you again for your efforts. I know we've got a little bit to go, but I think we're starting to see some positive developments with these rules.
Casey and then Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. I'm generally supportive of the direction the RAC committee is moving, and appreciate all the analysis and the scientific rigor. I don't see how it makes sense to favor what appears to me to be a more lenient stance on excessive decline by using the slowest average rate of decline over the last 5 to 20 years. I agree with Zach's comment that the statistical data seems to align pretty nicely with the numbers we started out using, half a foot a year or 25 feet total. I don't know why, I don't entirely agree maybe with the tossing out the 8% number, but also with, I agree with the people that have commented that they would like to see sideboards. But I think it might be good to have an escape route for basins where they can prove with a preponderance of scientific evidence that different rules should be applied in that basin. So there might be a middle way there. Anyway, thank you very much for all your work on this.
Thank you, Jeff, and then Zach.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Jeff Stone, Oregon Association of Nurseries. As the largest sector of ag, this rule will cut both ways for my membership. But the policy nerd in me wants to just kind of talk about what the impacts are, thinking about years ahead, right? So I see where it's going. I see the commission approving these rules, but I think it's incumbent upon the RAC to make them the best that they can be. I do continually refute the idea of a one size fits all, as I get them why you'd want to have a statewide standard, but I think in reality, basin by basin is more accurate. I think a phase-in would be helpful. People need to prove it up, and if people are applying, if they haven't done it and they haven't done the work, if they put in a permit application and did not take any action, then they don't get the permit, right? So I like pointing out to my dear friends over at COCO about how they've been able to bring people together. I think that's while I'm not advocating that model should be cut and pasted in all the other areas, I still think it's the intent and the goodwill that is built by doing that together is something that should be lauded. I also, while it's hard, I think mitigation still needs to be a part of this equation. There are some guiding principles, about preserving the resource, and I think that's important. As aquifer levels decline, what are those obvious triggers for the department to act? And but I would state, and while I am respectful to my good friends in the municipality arena, much to echo what April said about the data hole that we have for exempt wells, as long as that tail's wagging the dog, things are not going to improve. And so there's going to be a direct conflict between the governor's housing goals and these rules. Period. I do believe that, but I do want to thank the technical staff. They use words that I could understand. I'm about 1 in 5 words now, so I just want to thank you for your dedicated work, and I just want to see the best policy forward.
Thank you, Zach, and then Greg.
Yeah, I just wanted to say again, thanks to Travis and to Ben for the great presentations and the good work. Sorry and thank you for everybody's patience with me. The reason I was asking questions is because it's compelling, strong, interesting work, and I wanted to continue to digest it. TNC continues to broadly support the rules moving forward. In particular, I really support the rules that were put in front of the commission. I see most of the analysis that we talked about today being very strong quantitative justification for the rules that we already had in place in draft from the prior meeting. And that seems inconsistent with some of the changes that were put forth in the rules that we discussed today. For example, Ben's analysis showing that groundwater levels are similarly sensitive to precipitation changes across different basins. That that provides some quantitative evidence that statewide approaches are reasonable and justifiable. And then it's hard for me to reconcile that with then removing sideboards around basin rulemaking that can then undermine this process and the increasingly many hours that we're all spending here together talking about it. I'm still kind of confused about how groundwater levels can be considered both reasonably stable and excessively declining. That feels like an inconsistency in the terminology there. And then I just kind of wrap up by saying, again, the data that were presented before us showed that most of the time, most of the clusters stayed within 0.5 feet per year rate of declines. I think it was 85% of the time, or sorry, for 85% of the clusters, 93% of the time met those criteria, showing that the 0.5 feet per year rate of decline threshold is a strong one and unlikely to be triggered by climate fluctuations. Similarly, more than 90% of the clusters, much higher than 95% of the time, met the 25 feet total decline threshold. So again, I see these as really important quantitative justifications for the things that we've already discussed. And I'm reluctant to try to make significant changes to the rules in the 11th hour in a set of meetings that we are having, unexpectedly. So anyway, TNC continues to support place-based planning efforts. We love collaborative place-based efforts, and I think those are an important piece of the puzzle. I'm just concerned that the changes to the sideboards are going to have unintended consequences for all of us, and spend a lot more time and a lot more money talking about the same things again. Thank you.
Greg, and then Robin.
Yeah, I wish I had more time, because I could probably talk for about 10 minutes on what's on my mind right now, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. I guess I applaud the work that the department has done on the reasonably stable water level analysis. It seems to be, I'm not an expert on statistics. I'm not really qualified to comment on all of that. I think I have a fundamental understanding of what's been done, and it seems to be a rigorous approach. I guess what occurs to me, though, is that there's a big discrepancy between the amount of rigor that's applied to reasonably stable water levels, which is one leg of the three-legged stool. And the other major leg of three-legged stool is potential for substantial interference, which relies on a determination first of hydraulic connection, and then just based on the presence of a hydraulic connection, assumes if the stream that's being affected is determined to be over appropriated by WARS, then that forces the finding of PSI, which will then result in denial of the application. So, and that's going to happen most of the time under the rules that are currently proposed. So all this work that's been done for reasonably stable water levels is great, but it's only going to really apply, to a very small percentage of applications. And so I guess, I would like to see, and I'm not sure, I don't really have a lot of answers on how we would do this, but I would really like to see a sort of a similar level of rigor applied to an evaluation, that would lead to the potential for substantial interference. One of my biggest concerns is the reliance on the Barlow and Leak report to make the assumption that anytime you're pumping a well, that eventually 100% of that pumping rate is going to result in stream depletion in a nearby stream. Well, that is only really true if we're talking about a single aquifer that discharges to that stream. We really see that happen in Oregon. I have a figure that I would like to be able to have, to pass out so that everybody can see, but we don't really have time or a way to do that. But I'm looking at a figure that actually comes out of the Barlow and Leak report, where we have a multi-layer aquifer system like we see in many places in the state. where some of the flow paths, you know, in the deeper aquifers, groundwater may take, it says here millennia for that water to travel to the stream. You know, and so under those circumstances, you know, where you have a relatively deep irrigation well, for example, that's separated from the shallow stream by multiple layers of low permeability zones, or maybe a big thick layer of laminate silt. You know, and then you've got other streams that are nearby that are also being impacted from the pumping of that well. You really, you know, this Barlow and Leak model is not appropriately applied to actually determine how much impact is going to be on a particular stream. All it can really say is that there will be some impact. And in some cases, it may be so minor that it really makes no difference at all. And so I guess that's one of the reasons, you know, why I have a lot of heartburn over this great discrepancy between the amount of rigor applied to reasonably stable water levels, and then this other major leg of the three-legged stool. Because if one leg fails, the whole thing fails. You know, it's just not a matter of establishing stable water levels. You know, that's great, but then most of the time it's going to fail anyway because of this sort of what seems to me like more like a rubber stamp process. Hydraulic connection, streams over appropriate according to WARS, then you're done. So I see that as a, I don't know, I guess it raises a lot of concern in my mind, and I think it's something that, you know, it's kind of been glossed over. I think everybody needs to be aware of this. You know, that, I mean, no matter what we do with reasonably stable water levels, most of the time, these applications are going to fail because of the reliance on a lot of theory and not a lot of real data. Thanks.
Okay, Robin and then Kelly online, Kelly Warren.
I'm gonna be really quick. So thank you, Travis and Ben, for your presentations, and Justin for everything you and your group have done for us here. I still have a little bit of remaining concern about some of the language in divisions 8 and 9 and how it might relate to ASR projects, but I will follow up with you offline about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Kelly Warren and then Scott White.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say I really appreciated the presentations and the insight on the hydraulic connection. That was a concern of mine that we were making. It seemed to me that the general statement was all wells are connected to streams, and that alleviated some of my anxiety there. So I appreciate that insight, and that's all I really have to say other than thank you for the work. I think any additional comments will just be made in writing on the rules, and possibly the tribe may have some additional comments in some other formats. So thank you very much.
Okay, it looks like Scott has left the meeting. So Kate, I think you are the last RAC member on behalf of Deschutes River Conservancy who we need to cover on the roundtable.
Thanks, Lynette. I'll keep it short. Yeah, thanks to the state and all the information you provided, and most of all for this effort to actually protect the resource and not make the same mistakes we have in the past. So overall, just really appreciate that. The science-based information is great. I don't have the expertise to totally grasp all that, and I would just say that while I want people to dive into it, I do worry that the complexity of it could be a distraction where folks are getting into every detail and losing sight of the fact that we're trying to protect a resource. So some balance there as this moves forward. And we do think basin program rules could have some potential. The surface water and groundwater interactions in the Deschutes are, so deeply connected both with the challenges and the solutions. And so it could warrant taking a look at that. But again, I would call for a basin program rule process, not to abandon science and just look for local consensus, but really being backed up as well by the same rigor of a scientific look. So thank you again for your efforts, and I look forward to seeing what's next.
Thank you.
Kate has the coolest background.
I know, isn't it though? We like the art behind you, Kate.
Yeah, very much.
Are there any committee members who I didn't call on for the roundtable? Okay, Laura, please take us home with next steps.
Okay, I think I need a slide or two. We had a slide update, tentative, scheduling, as far as, the timeline, so, we've got our 8th meeting coming up in January. We're still hoping to, get a notice of proposed rulemaking out in early spring. I think we're targeting March 1st. We'll kind of see how that goes, I think. That will include a 90-day public comment period, hybrid hearings at various locations around the state. And then us, taking all that input and refining the draft rules as appropriate, and then bringing them to the commission late summer. There, I think we're targeting the September meeting. I forget the dates, I'm gonna say like mid-September, would mean an effective rule date of early October. And then next slide. Oh, there we go, yeah. And so I think tentatively for the January RAC meeting, we'll take a hopefully final look at our draft proposed rules for all the divisions, and revisit the fiscal and economic impacts piece of the notice, the proposed rulemaking. And then as far as getting input from the RAC on the content that you heard today, we can get that input by January 5th. That would be ideal, because then we can take that input and roll it into, consider it in preparation for our January RAC meeting. I do realize we've committed to talking with folks about some of Ben's work too, so I'm not sure, when we talked about a deadline for that or when we need to do that, other than we need to do it before our January RAC meeting, it sounds like, so be flexible with that, I think. Does anybody have any questions about timeline or logistics? Yeah.
Yeah, Laura, that, for you and Ben on the USGS peer review and getting some technical comments to you that could get funneled into that process. Is that January 5th date? Date that we're.
The 9th. Oh, yes. If you want to get comments to us, please try to get them to us on the 5th. We expect to hear back from the GS. We're hoping by the 9th.
Would that give them time to? There'll be independent reviews.
The USGS will be reviewing what's been submitted, and we will independently review any feedback from the RAC. The plan is not to submit feedback from the RAC to the USGS.
As far as the timing though, of meeting with RAC members,
I think we gotta identify who wants to meet and then look at calendars. Because we also just recognize it's a busy time of year. And April, if you have a hydrogeologist that you work with, who you would like to have participate on the Farm Bureau's behalf, we're happy to include that person.
Water Resources Congress.
Oh, sorry.
I will let Farm Bureau speak for themselves. I anticipate that some of us will kind of honcho up. I would just ask that to the extent that you can, it would be helpful to share with the full RAC maybe a synthesis of the comments you get back or the questions that you've been posed and maybe what those answers were. And to the extent that we can have that and any other updated rules or materials, generally speaking, if we could get those well in advance of when that next RAC meeting is, that would be appreciated so that we have time to appropriately review and be prepared for the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for staying over. We appreciate your continued involvement and your contribution. So happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you.
Thank you.